Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the MDIC Case for Quality Collaborative Community Virtual Forum. I'm Joe Sapienti, and I'm the Vice President of Clinical Science and Technology at MDIC. I'm also overseeing and leading the Case for Quality Collaborative Community. Joining me this morning is Ravi Navar, the Senior Director of Quality for Thermo Fisher, and Ravi is also the Case for Quality Collaborative Community Committee Chair. Good morning, Ravi.
Hello, good morning. Good morning, Joe.
So before we get started, I'd like to go over the agenda for today's events. We've got quite a bit of information to share with everyone today. So again, thank you all for joining us this morning and also for joining us for the entire day. This morning's events will start with the CDRH update by Cisco Vincenti. We're going to have a Make Capricool update along with the ASC pilot, an update from that team. We're also excited to be able to share some updates on Safe Space and the Medias working groups, as well as something else that's new for us this year is the Stakeholder Roundtable, which is our event where we reached out to the small, mid-sized organizations to get their feedback on Case for Quality. We're also very excited to be able to share with you today a case study by W.L. Gore in Advanced Manufacturing. With that event, we'll also be doing a live Q&A, so please stay tuned for that. And then we'll round out the day with a leadership engagement working group. They're hosting a live workshop focused on a chapter within the engagement playbook in developing a quality strategy. So we're very excited to be able to present that material to you today, as well as the live workshop. We think it's going to be a very exciting event and a lot of value-added event. Ravi, any comments about today's agenda before we hand it over to Cisco?
You know, I can't tell you how excited I am to have this forum convene at this time of year. Welcome all the stakeholders from our industry and related collaborative community groups in our continued focus to shift the focus from baseline regulatory compliance to sustained and predictive quality practices. There are some really exciting initiatives that are ongoing within the forum that I am sure that folks will be very interested in hearing about, including the ones that Joe just mentioned, and they span all the way from safe space initiatives and recall to making Capricool to engaging more with the supplier community and creating a safe space for sharing valuable information. So I really look forward to this, and I'm really excited about this, and I'm sure this is going to be very valuable to all of our members of the extended collaborative community, which constitutes the case for quality, and this, and particularly in partnership with the Food and Drug Administration and with stakeholders across the entire diaspora of the community, really makes for a very enriching and valuable set of contributions and learnings for all. So welcome.
Thank you, Ravi. So right now I'd like to introduce Cisco Vincenti. Cisco is our program manager for Case for Quality at CDRH FDA. Cisco, thanks for joining us, and we'd like to hear from you on CDRH updates.
Sounds great. Thank you, Joe, Ravi, and thank you for the opportunity to come and really talk to the community about what we're looking to do, things that we've accomplished so far. From a CDRH standpoint and the value of the collaboration. One of the things that I think is worth noting and always important to do is to level set why we're here, what we're doing, what we're engaged in, and the work that we'd like to proceed with moving forward. The first thing is just that idea and reminder, right? The aspect that we're trying to do with Case for Quality is to recognize that compliance is important, but that doesn't necessarily translate directly into quality. It is a subset, it is a foundational base, but really what we're trying to achieve and what we're aiming for is that high quality, safe, effective device for the patient and the user community. You know, Case for Quality, when it started again, just background for people who might be seeing this for the first time, it was really about addressing that risk to patients that was recurring. Tackling some of the challenges that we found out with some early work in partnership with McKinsey about what was really causing barriers to quality within the device industry. And from that, this Case for Quality community, this complete collaborative engagement to move things forward, to really try to tackle the right problems and come up with what are solutions that really result in a win for everyone across the board are what the Case for Quality is really about. A lot of the things that we talk about and what we're trying to do today is really about addressing a lot of those challenges and building up that community and its capabilities, right? The driving towards that increased quality for patients in focus, building that more digitally connected community, trying to build up capabilities within industry, within the agency, across the stakeholder base, really trying to do this in a way that is holistic, builds trust so that we can get the right information sharing across the board, because all of the answers aren't held at one particular stakeholder group. Right? It's not like FDA has all the answers, it's an industry has all the answers. We really need to get engaged with everyone who is part of that process in order to come up with ways that will tackle the right problems as we move forward. So, just to highlight a lot of the work that we've done up until now as a community and the value of what it's brought, we've talked about the collaborative community and its foundation, right? This piece of key stakeholder engagement that we've been able to get together and drive in order to continue to solve and bring together the right information set, the right partners in order to make sure that as the problems or the issues that we see arise, we're tackling them the right way, coming up with the right solutions for everyone. We've got our voluntary improvement program, which has really been a big demonstration of the success of that kind of collaboration. The value it's brought to its participants, it brought value to FDA, but it also has spun out several other efforts and activities based on the learnings there. And that's where you'll hear a bit more about the CAPA pilot and its progress and the ASC program and what's going on there. You're going to hear a bit more about the medical device innovation, information and analysis sharing platform in partnership. The intent there is to really start to bring in more of that data and that collaboration in order to better understand and better analyze what are these big ticket solutions that we should be working together towards. And finally, our advanced manufacturing efforts, right? The next piece of that building capability space, right? How do we get more of that technology adoption across the med device industry? How do we get data sharing and the availability for these new technologies to really help advance not just the device quality, but to help lower costs, to drive more resiliency across the supply chain? There's a lot of opportunities in that space that you'll hear about as we move forward, and hopefully really we'll get a great demonstration of during the core use case. So just quickly, where we are on our voluntary improvement program, just to give you the highlights, we've gone through several stages as it's gone through a pilot, and it very recently was operationalized externally. The next piece of that is just the FDA's, really effort to turn it into a policy for our engagement with it. And that's where we are in process right now. We are in the midst of drafting and publishing the guidance, a draft guidance for that for comment, should articulate and highlight a lot of what everybody is familiar with and how the program operates, but now puts it into a policy so it becomes a more official program within the agency's engagement. So stay tuned. That is something that is a high priority for the agency. It is on our A list and it's gone through a significant amount of the process. So hopefully it will be something that gets released and published soon. See, now you're going to hear a lot more about ASC, Medias, and the CAPA pilot a bit later today. But what I really wanted to just take a moment and point to is some of the work that we're starting up with the advanced manufacturing phase and put it into a bit more of a context. When we talk about advanced manufacturing, the agency does have this definition, more the official definition here. But really what it is intended to be is that idea about leveraging not just the technologies, right? People, processes, methods, ways of doing things that really help drive and improve the quality, safety, manufacturing capability of the products and devices. It isn't a limited activity, and oftentimes the people and the processes are a huge part of that construct and concept for advanced manufacturing. Why? Well, a lot of things that we talked about earlier, right? As we build up more of the capability, we're talking about better connection, better data across the system, lower cost, increased resiliency, information, better empowered user community that can actually help also be part of the solutions that get developed. So it is a really key and integral part of the idea of advancing quality and safety. But it does start out with its processes and getting everything well operating and functional at any organization. So that's, I think, where you see a lot of the synergy with like VIP and some of the other pilot programs that we've got running right now. Just to highlight the work that was done at MBIC, right? The Advanced Manufacturing Technology Landscape Assessment that was recently released. The white paper went out, but it did point to, where are our opportunities to really start driving this adoption, to really drive in some of the technology. This is just a quick summary of it. You can find the white paper on the MBIC website with more depth and detail, but you could see where bringing together some of the technology and that digital connection really helps to start to focus in and drive the control, the just information access, the capabilities that will be foundational to a lot of the work moving forward. And then from a CVRH standpoint, just kind of put it all together of what we're looking to do with the advanced manufacturing technology efforts. Our goal really is to increase that adoption within the medical device industry for a lot of the reasons we stated above. But one of the foundational pieces really was just working to address concerns on validation, computer safety assurance, things that I think were holding back the adoption of technology and barrier. And we've been working on the guidance with that, but now MDIC really has put forward a partnership and a collaboration within a group of, I guess, very passionate industry members who are really looking to help each other out and really put forward, how do you get this done? How do you adopt this technology in a way that's effective, efficient, safer, and more productive? We've got work that we've done internally to really prove out the idea of what this technology is capable of, and that's where the our ventilated digital twin effort comes into play, and you can find out more about that at another point in time. We are now working on really trying to get to the goal of developing an advanced manufacturing clearinghouse, which will operate independently of just the agency industry. It's a collaborative community similar to this in that concept. The idea there is to help bring together the right partners, not just in the med device space, it could be in other industries too, to really tackle what are some of the barriers to adopting this technology that are going out there. How do we get that done? How do we, as the agency, help facilitate that? And then how do we make it clear for anyone moving forward how they can also repeat the same process or the same activities? And you'll see an idea of how that will work out and what can be done when you get to hear from our speaker from Gore and the work that they did in that use case. So, I really want to thank everyone, not only for the time and effort, but for the continued engagement and participation in the community. It really has made a difference. And I think you can see from a lot of the work that's been done even up until now and what's been achieved, what can be done when, there is that common goal and there is an understanding and a collaboration moving forward. So I think with that, why don't we get things rolling here? And I think we will pass it over to our Kappa pilot team in order to have them highlight what work's been done there and where they are in the progress of really trying to shift the dynamic and understanding of how Kappa gets utilized and applied within industry.
I wanted to thank you for joining us for the MDIC CAPA Process Improvement Program update. My name is Catherine Merrill. I'm a Global Quality Program Director at Medtronic, but also on behalf of MDIC, I'm acting as the Program Chair for the CAPA Process Improvement Program. And now I'll hand it off to Bleda to introduce herself.
Hello, I'm Bleda Bonici. I'm with CDRH. I'm part of the Case for Quality staff working on various activities within the Case for Quality umbrella, including the Capricool improvement pilot.
Before walking through our agenda, I want to preface it by saying it's been a very challenging project, but also a very rewarding one. And the finish line is finally within our reach. So today I will start out by presenting quickly what the CAPA Process Improvement Program is. Next, I'll walk you through the timeline with key milestones, and I'll come back and present the framework benefits that we've been experiencing. And then Bleda and I will both present some detailed pilot data, and then I'll finish on a slide outlining what you can expect next. You may have heard the CAPA Process Improvement Program also referred to as the hashtag #MakeCapaCool program. And at a high level, this program was initiated by MDIC in response to an industry-wide struggle resulting from the current CAPA framework. Namely, there are thousands of employees that love to solve problems, but they don't necessarily want a CAPA. So we've also found that cross-industry best practice recommends a risk-based approach to improvement, and that the focus of the system should be on problem solving to allow organizations to improve faster. You can also see from the images on this slide that the team really wanted to communicate the shift in focus onto problem solving and away from a mostly compliance-focused activity to enable organizations, engineers, and teams to implement improvements faster than what they've seen in the past using the traditional CAPA approach. Before digging into the pilot results, which is what most of you are probably most interested in, I thought it would help to remind you everyone of the process that we've followed to get where we are today. Here's a high-level timeline of our key milestones. So first, back in 2018, we completed a design thinking workshop and benchmarked companies outside the med device space who were known for their continuous improvement systems. We also leveraged all the data that we collected to design a risk-based approach to CAPA and to then develop a pilot rollout plan. At the end of 2019, MDIC published the initial CAPA process white paper, which is linked here, and you can also find it on the MDIC website. And then throughout 2020 and 2021, we've been really busy actively piloting the framework and refining it real time based on our lessons learned. And the good news is we have a second white paper that is coming soon, and we hope a draft will be available in December and that it will be published sometime in the first quarter of next year. It will contain the optimized framework, recommended best practices, and some compliant examples of the various framework elements. Lastly, on this slide, I wanted to give a quick summary of the pilot that we've had so far. We've had 19 pilot sites from 8 different companies. And I will have to say that this team has been one of the most engaged teams that I've had the privilege of working on in the past. The pilot was definitely a success, with us accomplishing even more than we had set out to do. In fact, 100% of the pilot sites have now communicated they're planning on expanding it across their organizations or across their business units. And following the pilot, 3 additional companies have already come forward and reached out to ask for pilot support materials to help them implement the framework even outside of the pilot, which is possible because the framework does meet all regulatory requirements, as Bleda will go over later in another slide. So as we have already presented the framework at previous MDIC forums, and you can see an overview of the framework on the MDIC website, we were planning on just jumping right in and sharing some of the pilot benefits that we've been observing and experiencing. So here's a quick overview. We saw faster CAPA cycle times for lower risk issues. In fact, we saw improvements implemented up to 80% faster. This was due in part to the fact that there was more time spent on problem solving and there was simpler CAPA documentation. In addition to the faster improvements, We also saw clearer CAPA escalation decisions. And this benefit is really notable because it was one of those critical pain points that we had originally identified for the current CAPA process, that it was difficult to know when a CAPA should be opened. We saw more preventative actions considered. And as Bleda will review later, we saw very positive audit results. And then this final bullet, I'll spend a little bit more time on. This one's my favorite. During the development of the framework, the team held quite a few discussions around how the framework could be designed to encourage and reward strong quality behaviors. And I'm happy to announce that the pilot sites actually saw the framework encourage all the connected QMS systems to be strengthened. So, for instance, to take full advantage of the framework, sites found that they had to strengthen their trending process and their action limits. They also saw that they had to implement increased and stronger process controls, such as measuring and monitoring. And lastly, the framework does drive improvements in the risk management systems. And then the other thing I wanted to point out is you'll see from the quotes here that are included from the pilot site leaders, you'll see these benefits really echoed in these quotes that we've collected. So the first one is that CAPA cycle times have been reduced and issues are not being repeated. The next one is it really brought the risk management files to life. It's making the whole QMS stronger. And this is feedback we saw throughout the whole entire pilot, that the framework actually pulled on those areas and maybe highlighted areas that to take further advantage of the benefits of the framework, that it would reward organizations for doing so. And then the next quote was, it's refreshing to move from a mindset of compliance to problem solving. And the last one is that the fast track CAPA is easy to follow and user friendly. This next slide really will provide an overview of key pieces of the pilot data that we collected. First, from the first bar chart, you'll see that we saw significantly faster cycle times. The first chart compares cycle times for each CAPA phase. So you'll see it starts at the time to initiate, the time to implement improvements, up to the overall cycle times. And it compares them between the baseline CAPAs and those of the pilot. And overall, we actually saw about 60% of the pilot improvements completed in less than 60 days, which is a really significant benefit. And it also meant that those fast track CAPAs that we were opening took less than 2 months to close. And overall, improvements were implemented between 50 to 80% faster than the baseline, which was one of the key goals of the team, was to enable faster implementation of improvements. The other thing that we looked at is overall, the improvements were implemented an estimated 50 to 80%, well, 50 to 75%, reduction, a reduced number of required resource hours or FTEs. So in addition to being implemented faster, there was less burden associated with those implementations. The bottom section of this slide really highlights that we saw almost 3/4 of the CAPA decisions, or about 74% of the CAPA decisions, could be made by individuals instead of requiring a CAPA board. And this was an increase of about 15% of the simpler decisions, of that it was clearer when to open a CAPA, and when they did have to open a CAPA, it was really clear what type of CAPA was needed. So it was easier for users to see how to navigate through the CAPA process. And finally, we saw that almost 80% of today's issues could be managed using the fast track CAPA path. So next, I'll hand it over to Bleda to take you through an overview of the audit data.
Thank you, Catherine. As Catherine has mentioned, applying a risk-based approach is in line with regulatory requirements. FDA's expectations of risk management include essential practices such as risk analysis, risk evaluation, and risk controls, which are intended to be a framework to successfully manage risk throughout the product lifecycle. And it does not end with the design and production of the medical devices, but it continues on into post-market operations, including practices and procedures for identifying, for analyzing and controlling and monitoring risk throughout the product lifecycle. This is also aligned with ISO 14971, which requires risk management to be fully integrated into the established quality management system. So therefore, it is no surprise what we heard from different auditors that audited some of the CAPA systems of the sites that have been enrolled in the CAPA pilot. They thought that this is an interesting and exciting pilot, and they liked the faster turnaround of the low risk CAPAs. It is also not a surprise at all that out of the 32 audits that were completed during the CAPA pilot cycle, no CAPA related observations or nonconformances were noted. And that's partially because we did a lot of work in the beginning of the pilot as we designed the framework to ensure that the framework not only meets the regulatory requirements, but it also talks to or addresses some of the pain points that we heard in the beginning or prior to even initiating the pilot. So we've gathered great input as Catherine has walked through in the last couple slides. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Catherine to let you know what you should expect next from this work.
Thank you, Bleda. For those of you who would like to learn more about the framework, you can visit the MDIC website where there's an online training and you can have access to the initial white paper with the framework. Also, the final white paper is being written and we're hoping it will be released in the first quarter of next year. And if you do have any specific questions or you would like access to the pilot support materials, please reach out to us and we are definitely here to help you out. So with that, I would like to thank you again for joining us and to let you know that we're looking forward to hearing about new success stories as organizations begin to use the new framework across the med device space. So I wanted to thank you for joining us for the Accelerate Sustainable Capability Pilot Study presentation, which is also known as the ASC Pilot Study for short. My name is Catherine Merrill. I'm a Global Quality Program Director at Medtronic, but also on behalf of MDIC, I'm acting as the program chair for this pilot study. Now I'd like to turn it over to Bleda to introduce herself and to kick us off.
Hi, I'm Bleda Vinici. I'm with the Case for Quality staff within CDRH. I'm one of the team leads working on various Case for Quality activities, including the ASC pilot, which we'll walk through today during this presentation. So the pilot is facilitated by MDIC. The FDA's participation in the ASC pilot is one of the examples of our continued efforts to ensure patients and providers have access to safe and effective, high-quality medical devices. This pilot leverages what we've learned from the Voluntary Improvement Program, or some of you might know it as the VIP pilot or program. And it is an opportunity to partner with organizations to address compliance issues and improve product quality. There was definitely a need of new tools to elevate an organization's quality maturity and foster continuous improvement throughout the product lifecycle. We want to focus beyond the regulatory requirements and drive continuous improvements within the organizations that are enrolled in the pilot. The use of the CMMI appraisal process and the residual risk assessment does just that. These tools are intended to help focus and support the organization's improvement efforts and complement some of the work that may have already been initiated to address the compliance violations previously cited by the agency or other regulators within the industry. The ASC pilot is an opportunity to work with the agency in a different venue, which in turn may also help strengthen the partnership with the FDA. On the other hand, for the agency, we'll continue to meet the missions by proactively engaging with the participating sites and getting them in a state of sustainable compliance, but also promote continuous improvement and organizational excellence to drive beyond that baseline compliance state and focus on the continuous improvement efforts within the life cycle of the product that are in the field. FDA, so both ORA and CDRH, are engaged and have been a part of the ASD working group since the inception of the pilot. And we are fully committed as well as supportive of these activities. I will now turn it over to Catherine to provide a pilot overview as well as provide updates on what has occurred until now and where are we going next.
Thank you, Bleda. The last time we presented on this topic at the MDIC forum, we were just starting the work. So now we're pleased to announce that the ASD pilot study is off and running. So in this presentation, I'll provide a brief overview of the pilot, as well as to dig into the expected benefits for the participating sites. I'll also go over the resources that are available for pilot sites. And then I'll go over and give you a little bit more detail about how you can join us in the pilot. So I want to start out my overview by saying that there are 5 pilot slots still open. I'm starting out with this in case there are any eligible sites who are listening who may want to participate. So there are a total of 9 sites allowed. 4 of the slots have already been filled, and we have 2 that are currently in the application review process. We're looking for 2 or more sites that are self-identifying, 2 or more sites with 483s but no compliance action, and 2 or more sites with an advisory action like a warning letter or an untitled letter or a regulatory meeting. So first, I wanted to go over the main pilot elements. So to start with, if your organization does prefer to keep your enrollment confidential, this is definitely an option. It's an 18-month pilot study after your initial CMMI appraisal. And the CMMI appraisal process is very similar to VIP or the Voluntary Improvement Program, but it would be focused on those processes that were identified with compliance concerns. There's also a quarterly residual risk assessment using publicly available MOD data. And this is new compared to the VIP program. But still similar to VIP, sites will complete a quarterly report of progress to the CMMI. Also similar to VIP, there will be quarterly report of metrics to the FDA, also targeted on those processes that were identified with compliance concerns. Throughout the pilot, there will be an ongoing collection of lessons learned from the pilot sites. And at the end of the pilot, only if applicable for non-self-identifying sites, there will be a reinspection. So for those of you who are familiar with VIP, it is like VIP, but the work will be targeted at those processes impacted by the compliance concerns. So next, I'll review the pilot site expectations. So we'll start with the action plan. This includes the compliance gaps, which have to be addressed. Next, there's the residual risk tool input that will help the sites prioritize those improvement opportunities that were identified by the CMMI appraisal. Second, there are quarterly checkpoints with CMMI, and this is where the action plan status will be reviewed and the performance report metrics will be provided as well. And finally, as with VIP, there's an expectation of transparency during the pilot to enable the site to better partner with the FDA as they improve. So now we get to the good stuff. This slide will capture all the reasons that the working group feels it's a strong pilot opportunity for those sites that are focusing on achieving greater levels of compliance. So namely, the pilot was intentionally designed to support an environment of collaboration, especially within the regular touch points with the FDA, which would enable clearer expectations and alignment around the site's action plan. And the site will also benefit from the organizational excellence improvements to help sustain those compliance gap closures. And the residual risk assessment can help the sites prioritize what to improve first. And I did want to note that the intent of the appraisal is to improve both the QMS processes and the business processes that support it to support improved product quality. And finally, this is an opportunity to help shape how the sites could potentially be supported on their improvement journey in the future. And let's not forget that the cost will be fully covered by MDIC, which is an excellent benefit. To support the sites participating in the pilot, resources have been developed by the working group, such as a detailed playbook, some standard templates, the residual risk tool information. And I also wanted to note that the pilot is being completed following a detailed program definition document just to ensure site-to-site consistency. The participating sites also have ready access to pilot site support. For instance, they have access to the MDIC ASC working group, as well as the MDIC ASC sponsor working group, which really is in place to maintain the confidentiality requirements of the participating sites. The sites will also have access to the support from their CMMI lead appraisers, as well as management control and the FDA. So I also wanted to highlight finally that the pilot will be improved in real time in responses to those lessons learned that are collected from the sites. And this really is because we want to make sure that the ASC pilot is providing real value added to each of the participating sites. Okay, the last slide I wanted to share with you comes directly from our participating sites. Although the feedback is anonymous, we thought it would be good for you to hear directly what the pilot sites were saying. So as I mentioned earlier, there are 4 sites in the program, with 2 having already completed their CMMI appraisals. As you can see where each site is on the timeline here at the top of the slide, they're designated by the teal dots. You've got all of them have been enrolled. You have a couple of them that have completed their residual risk assessment, and 2 of them have completed their CMMI appraisal. As you can see from the first column, we asked the sites, why did you decide to enroll? And I'll just summarize these at a high level. The responses we received were that it provides an evaluation of quality system maturity. They thought the collaboration with FDA and the alignment on the action plan was definitely what they were looking for, as well as the waived routine inspections they felt would help them focus on their improvement plans. And then the next response we received was that they were looking forward to the benefits that the ASC pilot program could provide to work collaboratively with the FDA and other stakeholders. Next, we asked them how were the inputs from the CMMI appraisal the same or different than inputs that had already been identified through the audit process. And the response we received indicated that they did identify in the CMMI appraisal some opportunities with low compliance impact. Some of them were new to the site, but some of them were in areas that were similar to what was already considered for improvement. But they felt that the appraisal team allowed the site to focus their efforts and formalize their improvement projects. The next question we asked the sites was, what value have you gained from the residual risk assessment? And both responses we received indicated that they didn't identify any new areas requiring action when they compared them with their existing post-market surveillance process. So no additional actions were identified for both the sites that did respond. What is something that you wish you knew before joining the pilot was the next question we asked. And the first site that responded indicated they wanted to know more about the CMMI appraisal process because they were looking for how does that preparation, what preparation is required for the appraisal. And then the next feedback indicated that they thought it would be helpful to get feedback from other sites that had gone through the program. And the final question that we asked was, what would you say to people who are deciding whether or not to join the pilot? The responses we received indicated that it's a great opportunity to partner with the FDA to improve the quality system processes and compliance using a best practice approach. And the next response we received was the pilot is an opportunity for a site that may be in remediation mode to also think about how continuous improvement focus can help to improve the quality of products. So those are some really good feedback pieces that we received. So before we close, I wanted to encourage any eligible sites to consider applying for the pilot. If you're interested in learning more, you can visit the MDIC website and review the pilot support materials that are available there, such as the playbook, a webinar, and some FAQs. Finally, feel free to contact us with any questions you may have because we're here to help. So I want to thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to any of you who would like to participate in the pilot.
All right. Hello, everyone. We're here today to give an update on the Safe Space pilot. My name is Catherine Mack. I'm from Stryker, and joining me with this update is Mark Retkovitz from Innovise. The agenda for today has primarily focused on an update, and with the update, we'll be providing answers to the questions: what is Safe Space? How does it work? Where have we been with the Safe Space project? Where are we going? What are our early takeaways thus far with the project? And how can today's meeting attendees learn more? Our desire and hope with today's presentation is for you to get interested in the pilot and to follow its progress. The pilot has potential to build trust among us as medical device industry professionals and our community, and hopefully to improve patient safety. Underlying today's discussion are a few plain images, and that's because our Safe Space pilot is modeled after what's been done in the aviation industry. The next slide is going to answer the first question: what is Safe Space? The mission of Safe Space is to establish a trusted environment so that both manufacturers and government can share issues and best practices to improve device quality and to improve patient safety without any fear of punitive action or to impact anyone's competitive advantage. We started working on this just in January of this year. So probably going through your head is the question, who? Who are the working group members of Safe Space? The working group members are listed on this slide. It's a mixed team with representation from large to medium-sized companies, the Food and Drug Administration, and a public-private partnership member, MDIC. The group is anticipating opening its doors to new members in the near term. We're currently developing our onboarding process for new members that might join our group. So let's get into some specifics and get deeper into the Safe Space project. How does Safe Space work? Well, as mentioned at the start of this discussion, the way we work is modeled on other similar and successful programs, such as aviation, where accidents have been significantly reduced in the last 25 years. We've met with aviation subject matter experts, such as those from the FAA and the airline industry. We heard how they were able to start up and sustain similar collaboration forums for what we vision with Safe Space in the medical device industry. Based on that, we're taking a methodical approach with 4 swim lanes or focus areas where we first identify issues for collaboration, define the scope, conduct our analysis, and finally communicate our findings. For example, in the way we work, we identified topic areas for collaboration and 16 prospective topics emerged in this phase. I'm going to pause for a moment. Mark, what would you like to add about the 16 prospective topics that have emerged as we've gone through this disciplined methodology?
Yeah, the process that we've gone through, it's been really interesting that, a lot of brainstorming and between the medical device industry experts, the FDA has a great inputs. And then also one of the positive areas that I don't think has ever happened before is getting somebody on the provider side and like the hospital and what they think is an issue that we were trying to prioritize. And so they actually provided a great view of this information during the pilot as we were going through the scoping and analyzing phases.
Great. Thanks for that, Mark. Well, the next question is, we've got this methodology established. We've met with other people. Where are we going? What is this methodology uncovering? Based on the 16 prospective topics, we're narrowing our focus to a single topic, recall procedures, and to two specific questions associated with the topic. Those questions are, how have people historically made recall decisions and with whom? And how do hospital decisions about recalls change based on recall notices, content, and communication? Our single topic involved identifying data and resources needed, assumptions, and the timeline we need to work the topic. This topic has allowed us to learn more from hospitals, and we've listened to those groups describe their process once a recall notice is sent by a manufacturer. Mark was describing earlier our meetings with healthcare providers. Currently, we're analyzing and generating results. We have 3 subgroups who are at different stages. We are excited about our progress, and to get more specific, our 3 subgroups are analyzing FDA's May 2020 guidance on recalls, such that we have the opportunity to increase awareness of that guidance and find ways of accelerating communications between manufacturers and FDA. We also are analyzing, standardizing communication templates for manufacturers. And thirdly, we're able to research some possible electronic communications between manufacturers and healthcare providers on recalls, such that recall information is communicated much faster to enhance patient safety. And Mark, I think this would be a great time for you to hop in and talk about a little bit more about perhaps what you've seen with standardization or these other 2 possible areas where we're diving deeper.
Yeah, the sub-team we worked on was on standardizing recall templates. Now, one of the things we looked at was, what does a standard recall letter look like? And a lot of it is based off what's in the FDA guidance document, because they sort of list a letter. But as we were going through the whole process of looking at that, somebody brought up, this is what my automotive recall was, and it sort of told me exactly what to do, versus a letter is sort of, you got to sort of figure out in the letter what you're supposed to do. So it's like, let's apply some technical communication concepts to this to basically have the user that gets the letter know what's exactly to do. And so we come up with some templates that are actually, depending on who gets it, is it a distributor, is it a hospital, or is it a patient? Because recall letters, depending on the products we make, medical device makes all kinds of products, the format may be different because the users are different and they're doing it differently. And one thing we learned about what hospitals do is they have each hospital is slightly different, but there's a lot of, it's just like another medical device company. There's a lot of methodologies and processes that they use for the letter. So the templates that we came up with were sort of optimized more for the different types of groups. And so this is something we're looking at is, can this optimized letter actually provide better recall responses from hospitals and patients and distributors? So it was a very positive experience of trying to build out new templates and seeing, and we have to get to a point of validating that this actually provides a better response. But it's a good start and different way of thinking of things than just sort of, while the FDA is just trying to give you an example, it's not necessarily what's going to always work.
All right. Well, we're all optimistic about where this can take us. So not only are we working on standardization, the guidance, and perhaps electronic communications, we do know we have more to do. For example, we need a communication plan. We also need a knowledge management plan so that we have a history of our work and we can look back and remember what we've done. In summary, with this methodology, we cast a wide net and identified many potential areas of collaboration and chose recalls as our low-hanging fruit for the Safe Space pilot. It allowed us to start right away while also working on other things like our governance framework. And you've probably heard this phrase before, we're building the airplane as it flies. So what are the outcomes? What are our key takeaways thus far? When we do a recall, it's a tense time for all involved. No matter who you are, manufacturer, distributor, hospital, physician, patient, regulator, everyone is impacted. There will always be recalls, and there's benefit to us working together collaboratively across all stakeholders to make improvements such as the patient safety is enhanced. The work that we're doing in Safe Space in the pilot, it's not always easy work. We've had highs, we've had lows. Some days are better than others, but we're sticking with it. And at the end of the day, it's working, and we're happy in the investment we've made so far. So we've built a lot of trust within this group. We're learning that manufacturers definitely want to participate and are engaged in this collaborative environment. Many topics have been identified for exploration, and we're starting to hone in on practical techniques of improving recalls. So finally, to wrap it up, to learn more about Safe Space, what the audience can do is look at the FDA guidance on the recalls and corrections and removals. I didn't provide the link, but if you Google it, it'll come right up to your screen. Also, it's a good time to reach out to those individuals on the Safe Space working group, give them some of your insights and thoughts on these topics. And also stay tuned for more updates from us on the Safe Space pilot. Well, I hope that you and I enjoyed listening to Mark and I describe the Safe Space pilot. Hope you're enthusiastic about it like us. And we look forward to hearing your questions and thoughts. And thank you very much for listening to our presentation.
Good morning and happy holidays. I'm Mike Willen, a pediatrician by training and Vice President Medical Education at Atrium Health System in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm pleased to serve as co-chairman of Medias Governing Committee. Medical Device Information Analysis and Sharing Initiative is a voluntary partnership between government and the private sector. It was formed to provide enhanced systemic medical device data sharing, analysis, and utility. The concept for Medias stems from the recognition that data from a wide variety of sources can provide greater insights than data from a single source alone. Currently, information about medical device safety and quality exists across the medical device ecosystem, but it is not openly shared. This results in missed opportunities to collaborate on resolutions to mutual and systemic problems, potentially leading to inferior outcomes for our patients. With Medias, we envision a community of medical device stakeholders, such as manufacturers, providers, and government entities, contributing data for aggregate analysis and benefiting from the discovery of common quality and safety issues that span the medical device ecosystem. Since fiscal year 2020, Medias has been executing a proof of concept, or POC. This POC provides us with the opportunity to work collaboratively in testing how the Medias partnership model could operate and whether it could advance device quality and patient safety. We're starting small, working with the early adopter organization to focus on tangible results that demonstrate the value of Medias. Specifically, we are focused on building confidence and trust between participating organizations, enabling collaborative decision-making, and testing the feasibility and value of collecting, analyzing, and synthesizing data across the medical device ecosystem to achieve tangible results. The proof of concept has been divided into two phases. The focus of phase 1 was to conduct studies using FDA public data sources, while in phase 2, we plan to use non-public data from Medias partners. Over the past year, the Medias early adopters conducted 2 initial studies for phase 1 of the proof of concept, which ended September of 2021. These studies were chosen in order to build a singular database comprised of public data sets with high relevance to medical device quality and patient safety. Additionally, the studies provided an environment for the partnership to exercise its collaborative decision-making and analytic approaches. The 2 initial studies used public data from FDA, including FURLs, MOD, and recalls. Each study was conducted by a sub-team of Medias early adopters in direct coordination with analysts from the Medias trusted third party, who were responsible for safeguarding Medias data, performing objective analysis, and generating aggregated results for partners. The trusted third party conducted the initial analysis using the data and then shared interim results, which were validated and interpreted collaboratively by each sub-team during regular working sessions. The analytic outputs of the studies, such as data visualizations and benchmark results, do not singularly identify any particular partner, while also providing valuable insights that are relevant to all partners. Let's take a closer look at each of these studies. The root causes of recalls study helped Medias to understand certain trends and outliers in recalls. Medias used data visualizations to explore, categorize, and describe trends in root causes of recalls from 2010 to 2019. This time period was selected for analysis to holistically assess recall trends since FDA published its 2011 report on understanding barriers to medical devices and to account for limitations of the public data sets. The use case working group executed the study from November 2020 to May 2021 in collaboration with the trusted third party. The outputs were shown using the tool Tableau, which enabled the early adopters to see dimensions of analysis in a dashboard format. The dashboard also included additional filters to further explore the data. Results of this study were, number 1, visualizations that display the distribution of recalls in terms of 7 dimensions of analysis, such as medical specialty and recall class. These dimensions provided different ways to categorize and examine trends in root causes. And number 2, benchmarks that allow individual early adopters to view the recall distribution for devices compared to the industry as a whole. Now let's take a closer look at each of these studies. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce you to my colleague and co-chair, Rob, who will walk you through this information set.
Thanks, Mike. My name is Rob Krohn, and I am the Global Regulatory Compliance Manager at Boston Scientific. Medias' second study was evaluating if MDRs are predictive of recalls and to what extent. Medias applied data science to 1, identify factors most associated with future recalls, and 2, predict devices with a high probability for recall. The factors associated with a higher probability of future device recalls include past recall metrics, past MDR metrics, and device characteristics. Using the 2010 to 2020 time period, data was aggregated into quarters, and then the model used an 8-quarter window to predict recalls in the following year. The use case working group applied data modeling capabilities and visualizations to assess early indicators and features to correlate with historical recalls, and with models that could work using public data. The model results can predict 75% of recalls and 58% of non-recalls for devices. The findings show that MDRs can help predict recalls. Past recalls and device characteristics are also predictive of recalls. The model could be matured with the incorporation of additional data sets. The findings from these studies have given the early adopters valuable insights into these 2 areas. For example, one early adopter commented, "What we're able to see in these use case studies was a totally new view we've never seen before, and the level of analytical rigor has changed how we view our own metrics." These studies have also served as building blocks for Medias capabilities. They lay the groundwork for establishing trust among participating organizations and shows Medias' ability to enable collaborative decision-making. The lessons learned from these studies were leveraged as Medias embarks on phase 2 studies that incorporate non-public data from Medias partners. In order to transition from phase 1 to phase 2, the Medias trusted third party hosted the 2nd annual summit for early adopters and Medias proof of concept supporters from June 22nd to 24th, 2021. The 3-day entirely virtual summit enabled participants, which included industry, a healthcare provider, and FDA representatives, to review progress for phase 1 and to begin preparing for phase 2. During the Medias Summit, early adopters had the opportunity to review and modify the existing success criteria for the proof of concept to ensure that it aligns with their current thinking. Early adopters also participated in ideation sessions to identify phase 2 studies. Many ideas were proposed for these studies as part of a breakout group discussion. These ideas were then shared with the larger group of summit participants. The trusted third party worked with Medias early adopters to organize, refine, and evaluate the list of ideas by looking at their feasibility, how valuable they are to the medical device community, and how much they build off the progress made in phase 1. This led to generating a list of potential phase 2 studies. Additionally, the summit allowed early adopters to identify lessons learned from phase 1 to incorporate into phase 2, meet the newly formed Medias Governing Committee, and hear testimonies on why this work matters to healthcare providers, regulators, and medical device manufacturers. Some key takeaways from the summit include excitement was expressed about Medias. Some participants expressed their optimism and enthusiasm for the direction Medias is pursuing and the work accomplished by the partnership to date. Specifically, the participants felt that the use case working group made good progress on the studies. Early adopters are forming a healthy community that some participants express as meaningful. While the forming stage of the partnership has taken time, the genuine relationships are being built and the tone of the group was positive. Participants look forward to phase 2. There was definitely a feeling that phase 2 will be a pivotal time for Medias. Participants uniformly had high expectations for phase 2, and they had a variety of priorities for phase 2. Some early adopters felt that phase 2 would be a time to continue to build upon the work that has been done to create community within Medias and demonstrate the trusted third party's competencies for data stewardship. Some early adopters also emphasized that phase 2 studies should focus on solidifying the value proposition of Medias through achieving a novel research result using non-public data. In phase 2, Medias is exploring the incorporation of non-public data from early adopters into its studies. The use of non-public data will require formalizing partnerships through Medias. Formalized partnerships will be accomplished through collaborative agreements. Key activities in phase 2 include continuing non-public data sharing discussions with early adopters. Over the last several months, the trusted third party has been actively engaged in discussions with 5 Medias early adopter organizations, including the FDA, on non-public data sharing for the Medias phase 2. The trusted third party is exploring key questions such as how will each data source be de-identified prior to and or during its residency with the trusted third party. These non-public data sharing discussions are not just critical for executing phase 2. We're building a framework for how Medias partners will share data moving forward. These non-public data sharing discussions are a basis for that framework. Reviewing phase 2 studies with the governing committee for their selection. Studies for phase 2 are currently under review by the governing committee and will be prioritized based on potential for impact, feasibility, and risk. These activities will continue into 2022 as Medias moves through phase 2. If you have any questions or are interested in learning more about Medias, please reach out to caseforquality@meter.org. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Pat Schaefer. I lead our regulatory and quality practice at FTI Consulting.
And hi, my name is Steve Silverman. I'm the president of the Silverman Group, which is a consultancy for the medical device industry.
It's a pleasure to be here today. The purpose of this particular segment is to inform you about the effort to broaden stakeholder engagement with the MDIC programs. What we have noticed is that while the programs currently are very supportive of larger, more mature medical device companies, we don't really have that much participation from pre-revenue and small and mid-sized companies. So this whole initiative has been an opportunity to explore how to, as I say, broaden that engagement. One of the reasons is that much of the innovation comes perhaps from these small, innovative companies and are often acquired by the larger companies. So it's in everybody's best interest to establish an effective quality capability early on. What we're exploring are the current work streams with Case for Quality inclusive of all of the critical stakeholder groups? And if so, how do we broaden participation? If not, where are there gaps? And what can we do to basically further align those programs with the needs of the broader Case for Quality collaborative community?
As many of you know, the Case for Quality collaborative community, as Pat mentioned, or CFQCC, brings together medical device stakeholders to find and develop strategies to strengthen device quality and patient safety. Importantly, in addition to device makers and healthcare providers, this initiative includes FDA. FDA, working side by side with stakeholders, expands the solutions generated and shows the agency's commitment to the CFQCC. The CFQCC has sponsored multiple projects like the Voluntary Manufacturing Improvement Program and the Quality Culture Initiative. And both the CFQCC and its programs are open to all. But again, as Pat mentioned, while we do have participants that range from small, specialized firms to large device makers with a global footprint, in practice, most CFQCC participants fall into the large company bucket. That's not the diversity that we want and that we need to assure that the CFQCC reaches all stakeholders. So recently, we focused on outreach to small and mid-sized device makers. We've been critically helped in this effort by AdvaMed's Excel program. AdvaMed Excel focuses on small, mid-sized, and emerging medical device companies. This is the audience that the CFQCC is targeting at this point to expand its reach and impact. And with those objectives in mind, earlier this year, the CFQCC convened a roundtable discussion with leading AdvaMed Excel members. This discussion focused on ways to build the CFQCC through outreach to small and mid-sized device companies. And in a moment, Pat's going to provide a detailed review of both what we asked and what we learned in response. Next, building on this feedback, we're now developing a survey targeting small and mid-sized device companies, as well as companies that are more in the quote-unquote startup phase. And we'll ask many device companies to respond to this survey. Like the roundtable discussion, we'll ask what quality means to these companies, how much quality drives their business decisions, and how the CFQCC can best engage them. And we're going to use these survey results to develop programs tailored to small and mid-sized companies. The goal, of course, is to assure that the CFQCC reaches all device companies across the product ecosystem.
Thank you, Steve. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about what we heard during this roundtable, which, as Steve mentioned, really was CEOs and quality organization leaders of a range of companies, all board members. What we asked at the highest level was, where is your firm today with respect to quality? What does quality mean to you? What does compliance mean to you? We then asked, is device quality a meaningful goal for your firm? It is, certainly something that the larger companies have established and woven into the fabric of their companies. However, smaller companies are probably more focused on, getting their product approved and onto the market. And so we really wanted to pressure test the importance of quality for an evolving firm. And then finally, we wanted to explore what would it take for these smaller firms to get involved in a device quality initiative such as those that MDIC offers. And what we heard, actually, we had a very engaged discussion that went back and forth. The most fundamental piece was that MDIC needs to improve communication, awareness, and promotion of the existing programs. There is already a wealth of best practices and workshops and efforts to improve quality across the industry as a whole. And just knowledge of that would be a benefit to these smaller companies. So again, focusing on communication and outreach is a good first step. But there were some issues. one of the issues is that smaller companies may not have the capacity or bandwidth to really pursue some of these initiatives. Also, companies are in different phases of evolution, and a company that is still exploring early product design as part of an incubator or an innovation center may not really be interested in a robust quality management system at that point. However, at some point, it's going to be very important to focus on the quality management system as they go through the development process. So scoping the projects and the initiatives that MDIC is offering to the different phases of business evolution is going to be incredibly important if, in fact, these are going to be fit for purpose for evolving pre-revenue and small and mid-sized companies. There is a recommendation to focus on efficiencies and improvements and reduce overhead, which really applies across the board. Also, because many of these smaller companies are working on paper and very inefficiently, a look to move to digital solutions and paperless processes as they evolve would be particularly appropriate for this constituency. And finally, everyone is interested in exploring appropriate uses of machine learning and artificial intelligence to basically automate those processes which can be automated, not only in terms of product development and how the product operates, but also in terms of the regulatory and quality processes that accompany the product development. There was also recognition of the trend towards use of software as a medical device. And so while many of the programs look traditionally at physical and traditional medical devices or even combination products, the fact that many of these devices are now purely software-based as apps on smartphones or other platforms, how can we adapt the initiatives to support those companies as well? And then finally, there was an extended discussion around this issue of compliance versus quality. One of the hypotheses has always been that if you improve quality, compliance is an inevitable byproduct. But it was observed that in some cases, companies that are overly focused on continuous improvement and don't keep an eye on compliance may find themselves in hot water as well. So again, I think balancing this focus on compliance and quality as companies move to pursue continuous improvement is going to be critically important. Steve, let me open it up to you, see if you have any thoughts on any of these pieces.
Thanks very much, Pat. I actually agree very much with the points that you raised, and I think that you addressed them very correctly. I also agree that recognizing that for some companies, there's not as much sensitivity to this issue of quality and that they think in terms of compliance rather than quality is a very important issue, as well as the point that you raised, Pat, about what moving towards quality means and the need to be attentive simultaneously to compliance, whether that compliance happens, as you say, as a result of the push towards quality, or whether or not there needs to be continuing mechanisms to assure that compliance occurs while quality is the goal.
Great. Thank you, Steve. So Steve, let you wrap this up.
Thank you very much, Pat. I think that the point that we are at right now is to make sure that we act in a meaningful way on the critical information that we heard from participants in our roundtable discussion. And we want to broaden the range of firms from which we are soliciting input. So in terms of next steps, what we are going to do is develop and conduct a survey that will reach out to a wide variety and a broad expanse of small, mid-sized, and even startup firms to raise many of the issues that we discussed during our roundtable discussion. And as noted here, that's going to require a little bit of crafting and intent to make sure that we are asking questions in a way that they are understood by firms that may be very familiar with the case for quality or may not be familiar with it and may not recognize quality as an endpoint that we have designated as a goal to work towards, even though in practice, that may be exactly what some, many, or few of these firms are actually focused on. This is going to be an ongoing process. So the people who were involved in developing the roundtable discussion are very much heads down now, thinking about what a practicable survey looks like and who we can reach out to get meaningful responses. Further, the group is thinking about what we can do with those responses so that there's a meaningful change with respect to case for quality, so that there is actual engagement and contribution to the CFQCC from small and mid-sized firms.
Hi, and welcome to our Case for Quality Forum here at MDIC. The next speaker, David Munson, is with W.L. Gore, and he's actually come forward to really share a use case that they've gone through that really does put together and demonstrate some of the ideas of the work we're trying to do with our advanced manufacturing clearinghouse and the benefits of the technology and the process they went through. So with that, I'll let David take over and run through what they did and how they got to their solution. And then afterwards, it'll be open up for questions and you can engage with them and really ask them more the hard stuff that went on their side. With that, David.
Thank you, Francisco. Good morning, everyone. I'm David Munson with W.L. Gore & Associates. I'm here today to talk about our recent project to implement a manufacturing execution system in our medical products division. My current role is sustainment lead for the MES. I also served as the IT project lead for this MES implementation project. I've been working in manufacturing systems implementation and sustainment for 26 years. Over the last 18 years, the majority of that work has been with Camstar Enterprise Platform, which is now rebranded as Siemens Op Center. During this time, I had the opportunity to work with and support a number of different manufacturing processes within Gore. For the last 3 years, my focus has been on providing MES capability to our medical device manufacturing. Summary of my experience. A little bit about our company. W.L. Gore & Associates was founded in 1958 by Bill and Vive Gore and has become the leading materials science company that focuses on applying the unique properties of expanded polytetrafluoroethylene to serve the needs of many commercial and industrial applications. The company operates with 3 divisions. The Fabrics division was formed after Bob Gore, Bill's son, invented EPTFE and discovered the unique microporous properties of the material. Fabrics division focuses on developing laminated fabrics for extreme conditions as well as everyday use. We are probably best known for our Gore-Tex fabric. The Performance Solutions division serves the needs of many industries. Taking advantage of the unique properties of EPTFE, our engineers are continuously innovating and developing solutions for the most harsh environments. We have filtration applications in industrial bag houses, keeping our air clean. Our wire and cable assemblies are in most commercial and military aircraft flying today. We even have our products on the surface of Mars. We provide critical components to the pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical industries. We have venting solutions that are in almost every car and truck on the road. Your cell phone in your pocket probably has multiple Gore vents, protecting it from moisture and debris. The unique properties of EPTFE make it an ideal technology for human implantable devices of all types. Working with doctors and scientists around the world, Gore has developed a portfolio of products to treat many medical conditions, providing life-saving devices as well as general surgical products. A little bit about our project. In 2018, Gore initiated the digital journey to improve our capability and enhance and enable higher performance and effectiveness. There were a number of projects started across the enterprise, including a new ERP system, Siemens Teamcenter PLM implementation, and the use of Siemens Op Center in the Medical Products Division. MPD initiated the long-awaited MES project with 3 key objectives: establishing an MES platform that can be leveraged across the division, maintaining or improving production throughput, and eliminating the use of paper records and enable the use of digital production data. So let's unpack these 3 objectives a little bit. So we want to establish a scalable and sustainable platform. The platform needs to be scalable for deployment to more than 30 production lines within the Medical Products Division. It needs to be sustainable for long-term support of all the current and future manufacturing operations. The sustainability aspect of the platform is supported by Gore's long history using Op Center MES. Gore has used Op Center for over 15 years in the Performance Solution Division, as well as in its core technology development group, where it has proven its scalability as we rolled out on many diverse production lines. We have a number of in-house resources with deep knowledge of the Op Center solution and an established relationship with Siemens. Even with all of this experience, our Medical Products Division went through a vendor and system selection process and found that Op Center Medical Device Suite was the only solution that would meet the rigorous needs of the division's regulated environment. So we want to maintain or improve our current production levels. The PMA production line chosen for this implementation project has experienced significant growth in demand. The production team has done a lot of work to optimize the layout, procedures, and product flow to maximize efficiency. We had to show that we could implement the solution and do no harm. Implementing a system that required operators to do extra work and to slow them down would be unacceptable. This was a significant concern of our stakeholders. We had to prove our implementation capability and earn the right with our stakeholders before we could undertake a division-wide program to deploy MES. And we wanted to eliminate the use of paper, master process sheets, and enable the EDHR capability. Paper MPS for the selected process required 22,000 physical entries on paper per week at the current demand levels, and demand was expected to increase. This was not sustainable at all. Humans being humans, these manual entries on paper generated non-conformance reports, due to those entry errors. It has been estimated that the investigation and processing time of these typical paperwork-related NCRs cost about $5,000 to $10,000 each. With our paper records, it would require 48 hours to 72 hours to assemble a DHR for review or audit response. In general, the use of paper MPS was just not sustainable. So how are things looking after 10 months of production using the Op Center MES? We'll get right to the good stuff. So one of our key components was we didn't want to have any negative impact. Post go live, velocity testing has showed some improvement throughout in most of the process steps. Our units per hour is actually trending up. The biggest win was in our QC prep area with an 85% reduction in process time with the elimination of the paperwork on day one. This has improved even more over time as the associates are more familiar with the system. We've shown a 20% reduction in WIP over the previous 12 months. Not all of the 20% is attributable to MES. We had other WIP reduction initiatives ongoing, but MES implementation is a significant factor in this reduction. We have seen a dramatic stabilization of WIP levels. We used to have spikes up and down. So there's no more spikes and dips over the year. WIP levels are much more predictable. We have an increase in associate satisfaction. We used a sim lab that was invaluable for giving the manufacturing associates a lot of interaction with our implementation team and the MES early on. They were able to preview MES and provide feedback, train to the system in a simulated production environment. The MES provides built-in process and data validation real time to the operator, reducing their anxiety about making mistakes. We can now produce an EDHR in minutes rather than the 48 to 72 hours that the paper EDHR required for audit response. We've seen a 45% reduction in NCRs. The MES implementation has practically eliminated NCRs related to production data entry errors or material labeling errors. All of our labels are now produced using the system with system data. There's no operator interaction with them. We reduced the scope of our NCRs. Previously, our process, raw material and components were issued to the floor, so we had traceability to what was in the manufacturing area when the work order was processed. Consequently, if we had a material or component problem, all of the work orders processed while that material or component was available for use were suspect and required quarantine. This could span several days of work orders, greatly increasing the scope of an NCR. The same was true for operators on the floor. They had a paper daily sign-in log to enable traceability to who was working on the work orders on a given day. Now associates electronically badge into their work cell and are directly linked to the work orders that passed through their cell while they were in there, and they are not associated with all of the production across the floor for the entire day. This has also helped with reduction of WIP. With the smaller quantities in a quarantine scope, there's smaller quantities set aside for investigation. Our second production line went live in September 2018 or September 18th, and we have a third plan for April of 2022, and we are in the design process for 4 more lines to be implemented in the next year. So let's talk a little bit more detail around the project. The first 6 months were spent forming up the business and IT team, developing the approach, and executing our current state design activities. We spent about 3 months developing the future state design, in which we determined all of the requirements we would be applying to the new system. In October 2019, we began our build activities and preparing for our first segment review. In December, we built out the simulation lab to represent the first step in the process and executed segment review 1 to demonstrate capability for the front end of the workflow. In 2022, we executed our second segment review in February of 2020 and prepared for the computer software validation, formal functional testing of the capability that we confirmed in the first 2 segment reviews. Then COVID hit and threw a wrench in our plan. Our functional testing had been planned as an in-person workshop in Flagstaff for the week of March 16th. Obviously, all travel stopped the week before. Over the weekend, we had to figure out how to execute our functional testing virtually. Using MS Teams, we were able to effectively execute the testing in the same 1-week time period without anyone traveling. The virtual formal functional test sessions for SR2 capability continued with the scheduled virtual test events in April and May. The third step in the process required the most development, culminating with SR3 in May of 2020. Build finalization, issue resolution, the test script writing continued through June and July, followed by the test events concluding in September and October. In September and October, we prepared for our user acceptance testing and executed that in November. Through December and January, we prepared the production line for go live. Production line went live on the last day of February 2021. So what does our implementation look like moving forward? At this point, we had earned the right and credibility to move forward to do a full divisional deployment. Production line leaders are now really banging at the door to be the next in line. We're taking a risk and value approach to deployment scheduling. Risk mitigation first, then greatest value gains, mixed with the low-hanging fruit for quick wins. Our completion plan is to be complete by 2025. We have to roll this out across the 30 production lines. It's going to be a huge lift, but with the platform in place and the program execution process developed, we can accelerate our pace to multiple deployments per year. We have a dedicated program team that is formed and to continue the implementations and sustain the business live on the system. We're also planning to implement MES, a secondary MES environment to support our new product development teams. This will provide our NPD teams with a number of benefits, including moving the MES capability upstream prior to commercialization, provide NPD teams with the MES digital data capability, support design for manufacturing efforts, and provide digital data capability to support submissions. We're actively working on equipment integrations also to further eliminate operator and system interactions. Machines will be executing the needed transactions in the MES based on conditions without operator action. Summary machine run data will also be able to be collected and be available for analysis or quality control. We're currently on Op Center version 7.8 and planning an upgrade in the next year or two. We're reviewing the potential to take advantage of new capabilities as well as the key element of maintaining our platform lifecycle. With just the base EDHR capability alone, our opportunity analysis suggests a potential savings of $30 million over the first 5 years during our rollout, and an additional $13 million plus per year after the program is complete. And that's just eliminating the paperwork and going to an EDHR. The soft benefits listed here are also highly anticipated by our business customers. Here's a few key best practices we identified and developed during the project. Our sim lab. The sim lab was absolutely superb for the operators. The transition from paper to system use on the production floor was a huge change for the operators. We developed a simulation lab to provide a systems replica of the shop floor to test and confirm our design and MES functionality. This was then used for demonstration and training for associates. The sim lab was found to be very beneficial for the users to get an early look at the system and provide feedback and generate excitement for the MES. We also developed a process for deep requirements analysis. For the production line, we conducted a detailed current state review of all the activities on the line to determine the requirements and use this information in the future state design for how the system would work. The requirements information was key in determining what functionality we would deploy and what new development was required. This formed the basis for the work with Siemens on the new functionality to configure the system. Our computer software assurance. We used a risk-based computer software assurance approach, which enabled less of an emphasis on validating everything versus functionality that is that directly impacts product quality and patient safety. We used an agile approach to the testing and captured functional test evidence in an ALM system. This significantly reduced our CSV time. Traditionally, we would wait until the solution was complete and then begin a functional testing phase of all aspects of the system, usually taking 12 to 18 months. We were able to complete the functional testing of this major system and solution in a little more than 4 months total time, broken out into test events. We collaborated with the FDA and Siemens on the rationale for submission for how we would submit the change. And the FDA accepted our rationale for an annual report notification instead of 2 FDA 30-day PMA notifications. So a little bit more about our segment review. We demonstrated the capability of the system to our stakeholders using segment reviews. These reviews were based on the functionality needed for the 3 major steps in the process. After the first segment review, where we demonstrated the work to support the front end of the line, we asked participants to give us a sense of how well we were meeting their expectations. They responded with overwhelmingly positive scores, as you can see in the upper right-hand side of this slide. We also asked what they might tell others if asked what they thought of the project progress and segment review experience. In the boxes on the slide are examples of the many positive responses we received. I'll pause for a second and let you take a look at those. To sum up the day, one of the best verbal comments we received at the end of the report out was a simple 4-phrase statement from one of the production leaders as he expressed his excitement for the system. No more pens, no more paper, no ERP transactions. We are done. there was a lot of excitement in the room when we got to this. So once again, we'll take a look at our results. We have no negative impact to the production line, which was the key concern of our stakeholders. We are seeing our units per hour trending up with no addition of direct labor. We have seen a pretty drastic stabilization and reduction in our WIP. We have an increase in associate satisfaction. In the past, we had cases where associates were really concerned and really worried and anxious about making mistakes on the production line. They were much more confident with the process and data validation that happens real time based on their actions. We can now produce that EDHR in minutes rather than 48 to 72 hours. That 45% reduction in NCRs is very valuable. Our reduced scope of NCRs, once again, improves our WIP status and helps us narrow down and speed up those NCRs that we do have to investigate. And we are moving forward with our production lines and have a good plan to go on with the rest of the division. And with that, I would like to thank MDIC for this opportunity to share our success story with you. And I hope you all will find some benefit from it in some way. And now we'll go back to Joe for questions.
Good morning, everyone. And I'd like to thank everyone for dialing into today's Case for Quality virtual forum and for listening in to the pre-recorded sessions that we had for you today. We're going to begin our live Q&A, which will be focused on the GORE presentation. So with me this morning, I have Cisco Vicente from FDA, our program manager in Case for Quality, and my partner in Advanced Manufacturing Clearinghouse. I also have with me Richard Vandegrift from Siemens, and a familiar face to everyone who just listened to the GORE presentation, David Munson from WL Gore. Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So we're going to open it up now for live Q&A. I'm going to give it a minute or two to give the audience time to type in their questions. But as you can imagine, I already have some questions for the panel. And so I'm going to start with Cisco. And Cisco, you and I have spent a lot of time on advanced manufacturing and the Advanced Manufacturing Clearinghouse. But I think for us, this is the first opportunity that we've had to sort of showcase a case study in some of the tools that we've seen, that we've talked about. So from your perspective and an FDA perspective, what are some of the takeaways from David's presentation today?
Yeah, so I think, just to get things in the discussion here rolling, one of the things that I appreciate a lot about the presentation that Dave just gave was, the sharing of the actual value that was brought forth by the implementation activities. I think, for people who are interested further, the slides will be available. And Dave has also done a great job of sharing, what were things that they did, what were practices that they put in that actually drove a lot of the success they had. A better detailed guidebook. So when I look at what was done in the presentation, it does capture the intent of what we'd like to be able to do within the idea of the Advanced Manufacturing Clearinghouse, right? Support some of these efforts and these activities, provide anything on our end that we can do to help really clear any barriers or provide any guidance along the way to the adoption. And then, let's find out how this was done. How do we share the results, right? How do we help bring to light what the value proposition could be and how it was established and done so other companies can then replicate that. So I not only think it was a phenomenal demonstration of what the potential is of just implementing, the technology in the system, but I thought the whole real presentation, the work that they laid out and how they did things and what was shared was a really ideal demonstration of what we'd like to be able to do moving forward with other projects.
Okay, great. And so we've got one question that just has come in, and I think this may be for David, and I would imagine maybe a little bit from Richard's background as a solutions provider. But David, can you talk about your upfront requirements and that setting process, some of the challenges in identifying all the expectations of the system and prior to selection?
Well, actually, that was done probably back in 2016, before I was with the medical products division. However, we did go through a pretty detailed process of getting high-level requirements from a business process standpoint, and then drilling down into the details, looking at the individual manufacturing processes and going through their current state and identifying all the activities that they do to make the product, to make sure that it's quality product, all of the testing is required. And we basically created a very detailed spreadsheet of what those requirements are. And then, from a selection standpoint, we can usually eliminate a lot of the options, based on those high level requirements. And it's in the details that we really make those fine decisions, fine tuning selection process.
Okay, great. And Al Kraus, thanks for that question. We also have a second question now from Rob Becker. This one's for David. So David, you maintained a pilot environment have you maintained a pilot environment to be able to assess new or enhanced capabilities prior to going live, or to make sure new lines will transition without issues?
Yeah, and that's a great question. Yeah, we are in a constant state of continuous improvement. So what we have in our ecosystem is 3 environments. We have a development environment for creating and testing new capability at basically a dry run level. We have a functional validation environment, which is a mirror of our production environment. Once we get things through the dry run testing and development, we promote to that validation environment where it is thoroughly tested, and we actually do our formal functional testing of the capability, and then promote to our production environments. So we are actually in a continuous state of adding capability based on the production lines that we are moving to. Not all the requirements for the entire system were developed for the pilot. We developed those the capabilities needed for that pilot line. Ideally, as we move forward with the rest of the 30 production lines that we have to go to, the number of new capability adds will drastically reduce after the first, say 5, 6, 7 production lines, and we won't find any new surprises.
Great. So David, I'm going to ask you a little bit about the concept that you mentioned in the simulation lab. I've had some similar experience with simulation labs, especially in an MES solution. Could you talk a little bit about how valuable having a simulation lab is versus maybe not having one on this journey?
Yeah, actually, this was the first time, like I said in my presentation, we've been doing this with Gore for probably 15 years, and this is the first time we used the concept of a simulation lab, and it was invaluable. It really enabled us to, once again, in our development environment, actually real-time test the capability that we were developing on a simulated production line. Basically, all the stations were set up with the systems in place. We had the label printers to print the labels that were required with the transaction and all those kind of things. And it enabled us to do rapid turnaround on capability. As we developed, we found what worked, what didn't work very quickly. We brought up key users from the shop floor, people who are going to be using the system every day, and walked them through using the capability in the sim lab and got their immediate feedback to do a rapid turnaround if we had to make changes. Sometimes they would come and say, oh yeah, but we have this exception in this case, and we were able to apply that in the simulation lab and very quickly turn it around. The other aspect of the sim lab that we didn't, we initially set it up so to do the development, but the other aspect of it was leadership engagement, stakeholder engagement. In many cases, when we've done these implementations, the leadership and stakeholders don't get to see what it looks like until we're actually ready to go live. In this case, with our segment reviews in the sim lab, we were able to get all our key stakeholders and supply chain leadership and everyone in the room to actually see what's going on. And it was invaluable to instilling confidence in them, showing progress to them, really getting folks excited about it. I know that in a lot of cases in the past, there's been a lot of apprehension about, we're going to a new system. Well, in this case, there was a lot of apprehension up front because this is the first time they've used an electronic system in manufacturing. Going from paper to the system was a big leap, but having that sim lab and being able to demonstrate our progress as we moved through was really invaluable for them. And then once again, from a training perspective, once we were complete with the build, we converted that sim lab function or use from testing over to training, and we were able to set out the user procedures in that sim lab, have the training champions move all the operators through the sim lab, so they don't need to be suited up in the clean room, but they can walk through executing their production in that simulation lab and really test out those procedures.
Great. So Marina asks a question about the NC process and the impact quality system. So I'm going to maybe direct us to some of the data that you shared in your presentation about the quantitative value metrics and sort of the reductions that you saw in the NCR production line, the prep times. Can you talk a little bit about how what you covered in the presentation may address Marina's question around the NC process?
Let's see the question.
Yeah, I think it ties. So, David, I think what it does is it ties together some of the pre-recorded sessions that we heard today, and
right,
the CAPA improvement program, and being able to identify, those, taking a risk-based approach to some of the CAPAs, as well as the impact that your MES approach had on NCs overall.
Right. Yes. So the primary result we saw from a non-conformance standpoint is the overall reduction of non-conformances and the scope of those non-conformances. And so from that regard, I think there's definitely a risk reduction overall. The content and the I guess the details within it, each non-conformance really it is where we determine the risk, and our CAPA team would do that evaluation. I was interested in seeing the presentation on the low risk versus high risk and risk assessment of CAPA. I think that would greatly benefit our CAPA team. I'm not familiar with their actual procedures and process that they go through at this point, but I do think there'd be benefit from it. From using the MES and evaluating NCs, I think our team has seen a much greater ability to determine risk for an NC based on the data that's coming out. They can see exactly who is involved with the NC, what material is involved, and being able to assess the risk for an individual nonconformance is greatly enhanced.
Okay, great. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and look at Richard. And Richard, from the solutions provider perspective, when you engage with companies that are interested in this journey, what are some of the typical challenges that they need to help, and you can step in and help overcome to be able to initiate the journey and then sort of the implementation piece of it?
Yeah, I might cover 2 points here. One, you talked about the simulation lab, and I think making that real for both the associates that were training and the leadership that was viewing what's going on was very valuable as well. When you see it versus computer software validation on, kind of just on a screen can be harder to follow. The second thing I think to really highlight, and maybe one of the challenges that we had here, was the approach to doing validation in a segmented area. I mean, it required a little additional management to make sure that functionality was mapping as we moved down the line and ready for testing. So there were some adjustments as we went through that procedure, but what it really helped was that validation time not only was reduced, it came parallel with a lot of the development activities. So we were able to stagger those activities, and I think that helped the timeline significantly.
And Richard or Dick, can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges you had to overcome? I've heard you speak about the value of the right resources and the team support. And can you maybe talk a little bit about some of the structure and some of the challenges and how you overcame them?
I guess I can start. So some of the key challenges we had in this case, we were changing our process for development. We've done these implementations before, but in this case, we partnered with Siemens to actually execute a lot of the development work for us, and we were taking an agile approach. So we broke up the production line into basically 3 segments: the beginning, the middle, and the end. And we prioritized the design of the components for the beginning and got them into the build factory at Siemens, and then began the design of those components needed for the middle and the end to, once again, in an agile fashion, move them forward into the build or into the factory for Siemens build. I think one of the challenges we had coming back was managing the actual workload. When we first started, it was pretty good. Get some design work done, get those items fully designed into build, starting to get those build items returned, applied to the system, tested, and worked through that way. The further we got in that process, there was more interaction required, I think, and it was a challenge. And then we had COVID, thrown in the middle of that, so that changed the way we had to do that interaction. We were doing face-to-face workshops on a weekly basis, every other week, and as that work piled up, there were some elements of rework in there. It really required a higher level of agile attention. We ended up going to almost a daily stand-up to go through the item list, and it was just it became a challenge to track and maintain that. But we were pretty effective in the end and got through on time.
Great. You mentioned COVID, so thanks for that. That was actually a follow-up question I had in terms of what was the impact that COVID has had on. I think we've all experienced some changes in the way we operate, so I can't imagine when you have a team structure like this, working remotely certainly did add a challenge.
Right.
And Richard, any comments from your perspective on how the interaction with your group was able to overcome some of those challenges that Dick and the team experienced?
Sure. We, as you mentioned, we were doing some face-to-face meetings, and we had the advantage of building some of those relationships and that direct communication. However, we collectively had a very dispersed geographic team. So we were already, it was a natural process for us to have meetings like this on Zoom or Teams, and those just continued on. So that ability to collaborate and to be present in the virtual meetings already existed, and I think we transitioned fairly effectively to all virtual.
Okay, terrific. Cisco, from a regulatory flexibility perspective, as we look at organizations that are adopting the digital transformation approach, have you seen any increase in how companies are leveraging, maybe moving from a 30-day report to more of an annual report process? And is it too early, or are you seeing some of that, and how do we anticipate maybe if it is too early?
Well, I think in terms of what we'd like to do moving forward, some of this type of technology and the way it's being utilized at the company, it does make sense in some way, shape, or form to start thinking about that shift. In this case, they were able to reach out to us. We were able to really get the details of what the implementation was and work through the review team and determine, yeah, this is going to be annual reportable, which is going to help accelerate things. The idea of this being broadly done is still something that it needs to be worked on, right? It's still a bit more learning, a bit more figuring out where the limits of where something like that would be. But, the one thing I think that I'd like to highlight is reach out to us, right? Just the same way that Gore did, because we may be able to help clarify and where possible, streamline that path once we understand the implementation and the way the work is done. I think ideally we'd get to a state where we have enough confidence in these types of implementations to know that they're not going to impact safety and effectiveness, and that can be transitioned, but it's going to take time to get there and build up that knowledge base and data set.
And I'll move back a little bit, and that also, I would imagine, includes some of the work that's being done on the computer software assurance as well. Continue to reach out as we build cases and examples of how folks are leveraging the success from that program as well. And David mentioned that in his overview today.
Correct. I think that's helpful in terms of getting that speed and agility in the validation activity.
Yeah. So we've got a few minutes left, and I don't see any new questions. So I'm going to go and ask each of you, maybe kind of give us, David, what are some of the lessons learned from this project that you guys have taken away, and as you look to maybe expand enterprise wide?
All right. Yeah, some of the lessons learned, like one of the key ones we found is related to the transition again from paper to systems. We underestimated the amount of time and work it would take to physically transform the floor. So preparing the production line for that change was something we should have planned for and evaluated much earlier. It requires the procedure updates, a lot of tooling marking where we're putting barcodes on tooling, the preparation of the floor from a hardware perspective, ergonomics, all those things. Once we got to the final validation and user acceptance testing complete, we started taking a look at preparing the floor, and we determined it was going to take about 3 months of time, based on, we got 20 hours of production every day, 7 days a week. And then when can we get on the floor to make those changes? What can we do in parallel with production? So that was a key learning, is plan for and prepare the shop floor well in advance. Other lessons learned regarding, just build capability is, outsource when you can. And we've got a really good working partnership with Siemens, and just being able to manage and control that information or the build activities using an agile approach and maintaining pretty constant contact. Like right now, I think we're on a weekly basis just to keep updated. And as the number of tasks and activities increases, you should manage that interaction appropriately.
Great, thank you, David. Richard, so maybe some tips for, and this is also a question for Cisco in the minute or so we have left. Sort of what types of medical device industry providers or manufacturers are you seeing engaging in this process, and maybe Cisco, how do they get involved? So Richard, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think people want to do this, and in terms of computer software assurance, there's an understanding and desire to move in that area, but there's still a little bit of fear on, we want to make sure that we're doing everything that we are required to do. So I think that's a transition process, and we need to keep communicating to it.
Okay, Cisco?
Yeah, so I think, we're seeing it actually starting to take place and take shape across various types of commodities in the medical device industry. So there isn't a a specific group that's charging or moving forward with it. I think piece of all that to really take away from it is, there's going to always be challenges with this. I think you heard Dave mention a few ones that were unexpected. We as an agency are looking to not be part of that challenge. So please feel free to reach out, engage, and we will try to be, as helpful as we can be to help move things along, because there is a benefit. I think you saw it in what Dave presented, not just for the organization, but in terms of that speed to just insight and information, right? What is it that is where I need to dedicate effort as an organization to drive improvements? How do I drive the improvements? The idea of understanding if the nonconformance is a higher risk, and then kind of applying that CAPA framework. The benefits are all there. We talk a lot about the paperwork reduction, and that's, I think, something that kind of hides all these extra benefits that come along with that.
Terrific. Well, David, Richard, and Cisco, thanks for your time today. That's going to conclude our live Q&A. Those folks that have listened in, we're going to take a break before we start the next session. So for those who've signed up for the Leadership Engagement Workshop, we ask you to rejoin us at 11 o'clock this morning. And again, thank you guys, David, Richard, Cisco, thanks a lot for your insights, and thanks for participating today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Welcome back to the Case for Quality Collaborative Community Virtual Forum. We have a very distinguished group today that's going to be hosting our workshop. And so I'm going to pass it over to Pat Schaefer from FTI to get things kicked off. So Pat, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you, Joe. And thanks everyone for joining. George, can we go to the next slide, please? Which talks a little bit about our agenda. Very briefly, we'll do an introduction, and then Jackie will do a deep dive into quality strategy, at which point, or after which, we'll have a panel discussion where I'll be moderating with Liz, George, and Jackie on the topics that we present, or that Jackie presents. And then from noon to 1 p.m. Eastern time, we'll have a 1-hour lunch break. And right after that, we hope you will join us as part of the quality strategy workshop, and we'll go into more of what that's going to be in a bit. George, can you go to the next slide, please? So a little bit about our mission. One of the goals of this and all of the Case for Quality work streams has been to really move the industry as a whole from a culture of compliance to more a culture of quality, where we're not looking just to check the boxes and achieve the minimum viable level of quality just to stay compliant, but really to look for continuous improvement. And continuous improvement can really drive so many things, or a culture of quality can drive so many things, such as reducing the cost of poor quality, basically integrating the customer voice so that we can design better products, and generally improving business performance and making our companies a more enjoyable and deliberate place to work, because we're all thinking about patient safety and the quality of our products. One of the key elements to achieving a culture of quality is, of course, leadership engagement. It's not enough to have policies and procedures in place and have a complete quality management system, but our hypothesis was from the get-go that senior leaders, whether it's the CEO or the site president or site leader, they play a very significant role in setting an environment or establishing an environment conducive to quality and conducive to that improvement and conducive to that patient focus. We require, or the leaders must basically champion the quality initiatives in a meaningful way. What we didn't know was, where are we today, and what do we need to achieve that? And so there was a it was called the CEO engagement work stream. Then it was called the leadership engagement work stream, because we recognized that the value or the role of promoting a culture of quality went beyond just the CEO, that it really had to be all leadership. And a group of us, and there were many people who participated, but the people most closely involved were Joe Sapienti, myself, Sarah Sulfridge, Robin, Donardo, Meda, Prakash, Jackie, Rama, George, Zach, Segulen, and Ashley Johnson. We're all part of a team that basically followed a certain path towards our ultimate output, which was a playbook, which I'll describe in a moment. It involved really identifying the best practices around culture from all of our organizations, and also reaching out beyond, including surveys. We tried to capture an industry baseline. Where are we today? And then, as I mentioned, collected those best practices and worked very diligently to develop a playbook, which is where we are today. And then some companies have started piloting this playbook, not necessarily applying everything, but identifying those parts of the playbook that they want to focus on. As far as what's in the playbook, George, can we go to the next slide, please? The first thing we did was develop this culture of quality baseline, and through interviews as well as a survey, we tried to define where the industry is today and where are the opportunities for improvement. One of our observations during this brief survey was that leadership might have an inflated view of their success. So it was primarily leaders who answered the survey. We didn't do a companion survey for the line workers who could validate these results. So keep that in mind when you look at this. Leadership believes they do a really good job of promoting quality, 90% agreed or strongly agreed. But interestingly, they're very transparent when it came to whether they prioritize quality over cost. Clearly, cost and financial performance drives a lot of the decision making, something that we wanted to explore in the playbook. Other areas of note were, do they really engage employees to better understand the behaviors that drive quality? Is it a top-down communication, or do they really walk around, meet with employees, and engage them in conversations that drive those behaviors? Where we seem to be failing tremendously is in terms of focusing on prevention over reaction. Over 50% disagreed and felt that they are not doing a good job of being proactive. And then only 39% said that they actually formally measure the cost of quality. So these questions and these results drove a lot of the thinking in terms of collecting the best practices and building out the playbook. We could go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to just spend a moment describing what's in the playbook. We're going to be talking about quality strategy specifically in the minutes that follow, and also in the workshop. But just to give you a brief synopsis of what's in the playbook. First of all, why develop a culture of quality? I talked a few minutes earlier about some of the benefits of embracing a culture of quality. There's this adage that quality eats strategy for lunch, meaning that you might have the best strategy in the world, but if you don't have a culture of quality, I think I meant to say culture eats strategy for lunch. Culture really drives whether people walk the talk and do what they're supposed to do. So it's so critical to develop that culture. And executives must demonstrate that culture of quality, and it must be apparent in their actions and behaviors as well. Quality must be a priority. And so our hypothesis is that if you do prioritize quality, the financial results will follow. That if you have people understanding the role of quality in terms of value-based care, in terms of being able to set higher prices for products, in terms of reducing waste, by making quality a priority, you are actually addressing several other objectives, including business performance at the same time. Measurement is critical, and what you measure is critical. If you're focused on measuring, not that you shouldn't be measuring the performance of the quality management system and looking at things like kappa aging and that sort of thing, that's good, but you should also be looking at proactive measures, whether it's trying to measure culture or trying to look further up the value chain and look at quality across the entire life cycle so that you can take corrective action before incurring costs of poor quality. So we just spoke about being proactive rather than reactive. The need to define quality at an individual level. Everyone should know what their role is in terms of promoting a culture of quality and achieving better quality and safer products. Encouraging quality behaviors. Looking at tools such as benchmarking in order to identify best practices that you can implement in your company, and of course, using quality metrics. Finally, recognizing and rewarding quality, making sure that you reinforce quality through the performance management system, or just separate recognition and reward activities in your company. So that's what's in the playbook. I'm going to turn it over to Jackie now to talk more about specifically quality strategy. Thank you.
Good morning. So when I first started to become engaged with the Case for Quality way back in 2011, it was before we started kind of some of the deep work around leadership engagement. As we became more involved in leadership engagement, we started talking about culture of quality and how do you do this? And quality strategy really came out as one of the first things that we need to worry about. But as a head of quality for many, many years, I didn't understand it. I said, what is a quality strategy? I don't have a quality strategy. I really have no idea what you're talking about. And so through this kind of body of work, really thinking about what is a quality strategy. And it really starts with just the basic definition of what's a strategy. And simply, that's just a plan of action or a general plan to achieve whatever it is your overall goals are. And if we apply that to quality, it's around where do we want to be in quality? Next slide. So this is a fairly busy slide, and we're going to spend a little bit of time on it, and I'll talk you through it. But as I said, the quality strategy is really your first critical milestone in how you develop your culture of quality. And I tried to break this down in a way, and the team talked about this, that would make sense to what we really do in real life, right? So we don't go into our offices as a quality person and say, what's my quality strategy going to be? I think it's going to be, we're going to be fantastic. There's a lot that goes into thinking about what your quality strategy will be. And it starts with really your business. You don't have a quality strategy if you don't have a business strategy or a business mission. And so typically how this works is you have your business mission and your vision, and that directly informs your quality policy. Your quality policy is really a more of a static statement, is really how we're talking about that, right? It's a statement that's made that says we are going to follow the regulatory requirements. We are going to be committed to delivering product that's amazing and meets our customers' needs, and that has the highest level of quality control. And so this quality policy is oftentimes where we stop, right? We say we've got a quality policy. Our business has told us that we're going to have this. It's on the back of my badge. So obviously, if it's on my badge, I believe it and I'm going to live it. But really taking that next step to utilizing your quality policy and driving that to create a quality mission. Now, the quality mission may be as simple as we want to do the best that we can for our company in delivering and supporting great product. That quality mission, and you may skip that. You might not have a quality mission, but that quality mission or your quality policy, even directly, and your business strategy. What is it that I want to accomplish in my business? Those are really the key components to what that quality strategy is. And that's not the detailed goals and objectives, right? That is really what is the overall mission or plan for what I want to accomplish in my company as it relates to quality. Now, I put over here the quality plan because sometimes we don't talk about quality strategy and goals and objectives. We say we're going to have a quality plan. And that's really the embodiment of a good strategy and your goals and objectives. We oftentimes call this a quality plan. The regulations lay that out for us. You need to have quality planning, right? But what goes into those quality plans are really your strategic thought and your goals and objectives. So we can go to the next slide. So we're just going to take a quick look. Very, very typical business mission. This is actually located in the playbook. And our mission here is that we want to be a global leader. We want to have product that provides effective patient outcomes that enhances well-being in ophthalmology. This is obviously a real live example. The strategy to support that mission is that we're going to focus on design, development, and distribution of safe and effective products. We're going to grow the business, and we're going to appropriately cost reduce by eliminating waste. And we're going to be a place that everybody loves to work, right? This is a very typical business strategy that then rolls down into some business goals that says, we're going to have high quality and safe products. So we're going to decrease our quality events by a specific amount this year. And then we're going to grow our business. We're going to increase our sales, and we're going to make our employees happy. And we're going to go from 80 to 90%. So a very typical business mission strategy goals example, where there's a very small point around quality and patient safety, right? And so what the quality strategy does is it takes that business strategy and it kind of explodes that into more detail around what you want to accomplish in your business as it relates to quality. And so let's go to a little bit more discussion around that. So quality strategy development, again, don't get sidetracked by the words quality strategy, right? It's really the beginning of your quality planning. It's what you want to accomplish and why you want to achieve quality or more quality or build in better quality. It's a very simple process. We're going to actually exercise the process today. Because although it looks simple on paper and we can talk about it a lot, one of the things that we have discussed and experienced in real life is that when you're trying to put together your quality strategy, it might not be as obvious as you think it is. And there's a lot of things that kind of go into that. Understanding what your quality vision is, or your mission. Like, where do we want to go overall in the future? 3 to 5 years from now, what's our overall vision? Really looking at data and understanding both metrics like key systems, complaints, and your inspection, management review outputs, but also deliberately gathering additional data like regulatory changes that are going to be coming, or what's the current environment for risk? What do our competitors look like, and what are they experiencing in their product quality? Are there recalls that we should be thinking about? And all of those things, industry advancements, all of those things should really be data that you think about in understanding how to put your quality strategy together. Then we're going to define and articulate the strategy, which sounds pretty easy. But what I would say is, in our work this afternoon, I think what we'll find is sometimes it's not so easy to stay at the 10,000 foot level. We oftentimes, me included, want to head right to the actions. Here's what I'm going to do in order to get to my vision. And sometimes it takes a little bit of patience and I guess some experience and just practice in order to articulate a nice, succinct strategy. And then, of course, no strategy and set of objectives and goals is going to be appropriate unless you ensure that you're properly aligned with the business. And we are going to talk a lot about that today, and based on some real life experiences where quality strategies didn't quite work and some where they worked really well. So let's go to the next slide. This happens to be a real live example from a quality strategy that I worked before. And our business mission was that we were passionately committed to a partnership with clients to improve and save lives through respectful, trusting, collaborative environment. That led to our strategy, which was that we wanted to deploy new processes, procedures, and tools to integrate services globally, which was new for our company. We were a global company, but we were very, very segmented in different locations. And we wanted to do that in order to meet our clients' needs to accelerate their time to market. So a couple of things here that were key. We wanted to integrate to be global. We wanted to have some new processes and tools, and we needed to help our clients to go faster. So any kind of quality strategy that we were going to put into place, if it didn't support that business strategy, it was going to be a non-starter. So you can see here the goals for that business were to retain associates that really hit on our respectful, trusting environment. We wanted to improve our IT tools. That was key in trying to integrate globally. We wanted to improve our service, and we measured that by NPS. We wanted to improve a quality index. That was an amalgamation of several different quality metrics that we would put together as a one top level score that we would track monthly. So we wanted to improve that. We obviously wanted to improve our sales and improve our profit margin. And the improvement of profit margin really would come from being more efficient. So let's look at the quality strategy that went along with the business mission on the next slide. So our strategic plan, and to be honest, we skipped a mission, right? Didn't feel like it was a necessary piece of what we needed to do. So we went right to kind of what was our quality strategy here. And our strategic plan was really around implementing quality processes that would support global business by the use of efficient and compliant processes. We wanted to create a hybrid quality management system comprised of key global quality processes and procedures, while still allowing site and business flexibility to meet compliance and business goals. That was really important because we had clients all over the world and they needed to go fast. And so in some cases, we needed to be very nimble in certain processes. So the goals and metrics in order to monitor our progress against our strategic plan, which obviously this strategic plan was going to carry us over more than 1 year. But our yearly goal that we put out there was that we wanted to provide advanced training to all of our quality associates in order to get them to understand all kinds of things. I think in that year, we decided that our advanced training would be around the different global regulations and how those informed our quality processes. We identified a global EQMS system that we wanted to implement. That was going to be critical. We created a global metric for customer service that was different than NPS. So we went one step further to ensure that we were really meeting our clients' needs. And then we improved our investigation process. We wanted to decrease the timeline and expense that would hit our profit margin, but it would also help us to go faster in meeting the needs of our client. So when I took that strategic plan back to my business, it's not surprising that it was, very well received. It met each of our different business goals very crisply and cleanly. There was immediate kind of light bulbs that went, oh yeah, we do need a global EQMS. If I would have gone back, if we weren't intending to globalize, and I'll let you in on a small secret, the year before, that wasn't our business strategy. Our business strategy was still stay local, be nimble. But we heard enough from our clients that were global that we really needed to move to a more global approach. I had come into the organization the year before, accustomed to working in global organizations, and I had proposed having a global EQMS the year before. Didn't go anywhere. Nobody cared. It was like, why do we need a global EQMS? It has nothing to do with our business strategy. So, and that, in hindsight, that's kind of a duh, right? It's like, well, of course it wasn't approved or it kind of fell flat. But in the moment, I had been hired as the first global quality head. My intention when they hired me was to help globalize and harmonize. And so for me, step one is global EQMS. I needed to let the business and the business leadership catch up to that thought process, right? They weren't there. After a year of kind of pain and suffering and feedback from clients, they were finally there. And our business strategy really caught up with the CEO's vision. And that allowed me to then implement the quality strategy that I had wanted to implement from the beginning. And it went somewhere. So that was for me a lesson in understanding the connection between my quality strategy and what I think is best for our quality system versus where my business is. And maybe I do know best, but if they're not there, it's not going to go anywhere anyway. So need to find other ways to maybe teach before we strategize. So if we can go to the next slide. So that takes me to a conversation about kind of quality strategy out of the box, right? Can there just be, here's my quality strategy? And I think the lesson that I had at that company was a little bit about me personally, and there is some ego involved, right? If I'm very honest, about me personally having kind of an out of the box solution. Look, I did this before. I was a global head of quality somewhere else for like over 5 years and was very successful at implementing a global EQMS and harmonizing. And that's why you hired me, because I've done this before. And so that kind of one size fits all mentality was where I started. Of course, this is what we do because this is what I did. And what I found out was it didn't really fit where we were in our business mission or strategy at the time. The other things that are going to kind of inform your quality strategy are things like risk tolerance. Every business has a different tolerance for risk based on where they're at in their journey of their business. If they're a well-established business, they may be more conservative. A younger, more entrepreneurial business may be taking more risks. It can depend on how large they are, how small they are, where they're at in their development cycle. All of these things help inform the risk tolerance. The CEO and where he's been before, or your COO, if they've gone through a warning letter before, they may be a little bit more risk averse. So all of those things kind of fold into what your quality strategy would be. You may be willing to take a lot of risk. You may not be willing to take much risk at all. What are your gaps and issues? Why am I going to implement a complaint process that's global if I've got complaint processes in all my local areas that are rolling up just fine from a metrics perspective, and they're being worked aggressively and everything looks okay, right? Why upset the apple cart if that's not something that needs to be done? Maybe that's a future state, but maybe that's not the thing that I want to focus on right now today. And I think typically we're pretty good about understanding our gaps and issues and how it relates to our quality strategy. But the other thing that we really need to think about is, what is your culture of quality? What is your standard of quality? If your company is very far along their culture of quality journey and these things are kind of rote, everybody has a quality in their job description with a little Q, then your quality strategy isn't going to be all about education. It's not going to be necessarily all about getting people to understand things better. If your culture of quality is in the beginning of its journey, maybe you're not going to start with updating your procedures. You're going to start with some basic education, maybe some quality days where you bring in your customers and you talk about the product. So there's all kinds of things that really don't allow us to have kind of that quality strategy out of a box. And so be wary of someone who says, oh yeah, been there, done that, can do it again, no problem. It's a little more complicated than that, right? So let's go to the next slide. Before we get into where I think the real learning is going to happen through our, where we talk through some of these real live issues in our panel, and then we go off and break up into small groups. Let's just talk about some key takeaways, right? So for me, I've got the scars to prove it. Your quality strategy really does need to connect to the business, and it needs to make sense to the business. You're not going anywhere as a quality professional without the rest of the business behind you. And sometimes that's not so awesome because you know where you need to go, and you've got a lot of teaching to do to the rest of your executives in order to get them to where they know where you need to go to. And that can be painful, but it's absolutely necessary. Quality strategies can take many forms. Really, most often I see them implemented as quality plans, the quality planning cycle. I rarely hear quality strategic, right? It's I think starting to happen more that way. when you go out and Google quality strategy, be interested to find that one of the things that comes up is CMS. They actually have a quality strategy and quality goals and objectives to meet their quality strategy. I thought that was very interesting. It absolutely requires stakeholder input and data. You have to know where you're at in order to know where you're going. And that's kind of an obvious, right? It needs to change over time, and it will change with the needs of the business. So at least on an annual basis, reviewing and updating your quality strategy / quality plan is something that's really necessary, because again, your business strategy and your business planning will change. And the final takeaway here would be that the quality strategy, quality planning is really that key input to building a culture of quality. Again, you might be starting in the very beginning with, let's teach people what that's all about. Or it may be further along where it's, let's refine it. Let's ensure that we're really doing, maybe we need to refresh the learning. Maybe we need to refresh what we're doing here. So with that, I'm going to give it over to Pat to go into our next session.
Thanks so much, Jackie. So for our panel, we have 3 people who have been very much engaged in the playbook and in our work since. Elizabeth Gapa, who is Vice President of Quality Management at BD. George Zach, who is Principal at Two Harbors Consulting. And of course, Jackie, whom we just heard, Principal of QRX Partners. And so, Jackie, you gave a good example of quality strategy gone wrong, or at least delayed. So let me start with Liz and perhaps put the question to you. Have you ever experienced a quality strategy gone wrong?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can share 2 examples from some of my past experiences. And the first was an example where, the quality organization and strategy was really focused on driving compliance to regulation, very specifically. However, the company strategy was about improving product quality, reducing complaints, improving customer satisfaction and customer experience, and hence a little out of sync there with the focus. The second one is an example of growth, right? So your strategy has to evolve as your company changes. And so if a company is growing through acquisition, I've had experiences where you can't rely on the same strategy that worked for a much smaller company. It's out of sync in terms of how people need to work and execute on the quality strategy. So those are 2 examples that I've lived through in my past.
Thanks, Liz. And George, before you answer the same question about a strategy gone wrong, Jackie just put in the chat, yes, we would love to have your questions as well. So I'll be monitoring the chat during the rest of this session, and we'll work those questions into the dialogue. George, quality gone wrong, your thoughts?
Sure. I think when we were first working on this from a chapter perspective, I fell into the mental trap that this was something that was easily done by many organizations, especially big organizations. And look, the big organizations have already got this figured out. And this quality strategy thing is more of a small company problem. As I've continued to do work post the chapter, and I've thought about this, it's really a core issue, I think, for a lot of organizations, is landing on a quality strategy that is clearly articulated and understood and congruent with the business strategy. So as an example, and I'm going to kind of speak with some degree of anonymity to protect organizations, but this might be something that some of the participants can relate to, is you may often see in an organization, if they're a manufacturing facility, they have a year-over-year business goal that comes from a strategy to reduce costs. So look, we're looking to reduce costs 5%, 10% every year, or maybe it's even 1%. And then there is on the quality plan side, there's some sort of objective or goal of no reportable events, reduce the complaint rate, limit the number of recalls. So when you start to back this up, you might start to see that when you get to a strategy that's somewhere in the middle between the business strategy and the quality strategy, that's where you start to see where there's things that might not necessarily line up and there hasn't really been thought to a quality strategy. So an organization that's producing something, a legacy product that maybe they've been manufacturing for 20 years, they're really stuck as to where can they get an additional 5% out of their, for cost reduction out of their product in their manufacturing. And so they start thinking about things like, hey, maybe we can change the design so we can reduce this complaint rate. But if your R&D department is also over there like, hey, we have to keep our costs reduced as well. And we don't necessarily want to go into a new design consideration and all the submission associated with that from a regulatory perspective, you can start to see how the organization and their functional silos start to come at odds. And I think one of the key points that Jackie's presentation tries to bring across is a strategy is really as agnostic of the functional departments, right? It is a strategy for the business, for the organization. And so my initial thought of this is just a small company problem. No, it's often maybe even more of a problem in my experience with some of the large companies, because strategy not being something that you have an 820 dot for, it's something that's not thought about until after the fact when they start to kind of come at odds at each other within these different functional departments.
George, thank you. Jackie, you mentioned in your example a situation where the organization just wasn't ready for a global quality strategy, and they eventually came around. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit, again, in the context of a quality strategy gone wrong, more in terms of the strategy changing, the business strategy changing, and the concern about the quality strategy perhaps being out of touch with maybe a new strategic imperative, whether it's a whole new line of products or whatever the case might be. Do you have any examples that you can relate to us?
Yeah, actually, I have one example where, and I think that this is probably pretty common, right? In our industry, we're doing a lot of acquiring and merging and things like that. So oftentimes you can have competing business priorities, right? So where I learned the global quality stuff, right, where I was really cutting my teeth, my entire intention was to harmonize and globalize all of our 9 locations. And we were very successful. I had a fantastic team. It was a great company. They did a great job of kind of harmonizing and globalizing in about 2 years, a great EQMS system. And we were just trucking along. And the whole intention was that as we were growing and acquiring, that we would harmonize and globalize, right? This is why we did it. So we acquired a company, and I happened to be the acquisition program manager of all things. I don't know why they put a QA girl in charge of that, but they did. It was fun. And for me, the quality strategy around how to bring that company in was pretty clear, right? Well, of course, we're just going to harmonize and globalize. That's what we do. That's kind of what we're built on. That's where we were. And so as I went to the first acquisition, some of the acquisition meetings, and everyone's giving their strategies, my global head of quality systems came in and said, here's what we're going to do, and here's how it's going to work. And even though I was the acquisition lead, it didn't kind of filter through that the whole intention of this acquisition, which is odd. I'm kind of looking back thinking, how did I not know this? They really, the president of the company that we acquired was 100% committed to staying completely separate. Now, went through and had those conversations with the CEO and said, I'm not so sure this is a great idea, and look what we did. And why we did it, because we had so many rogue sites, right? So do we want to actually bring one in as a rogue site to begin with? And the answer was yes. Yes, we do, because that's what the president of that company wants. He wants to stay. He wants to be the guy. And so it absolutely, that's what ended up happening. So, I mean, hindsight, probably should have picked up on that. But I will say now it's like 6 years later and they've been fully harmonized and globalized. So who's to say who was right in the beginning, Pat? All I know is that it definitely wasn't the time and the strategy needed to change. And so we really needed to focus. The new strategy had to be, how do we ensure that their individual quality management system rolls up in a metrics way so that the executive team had visibility? Maybe not specific touch points, but had visibility to what was going on. So that was a very different strategy than harmonize and globalize.
Understood. Thank you. Liz, I imagine that you found that over time, quality strategies change. And I wonder if you could comment on how often and what are some of those drivers for change that you've experienced?
Yeah, so great point. And somewhat related to what Jackie was talking about, I think you have to keep the pulse on what is changing in the business, what new acquisitions are coming in, what's changing in the industry, what's changing in the culture of the company. And you have to have frequent checkpoints. I don't think you can be prescriptive, though. I don't think you can say, hey, every year we're going to change our quality strategy, because what you don't want to do is have it be the flavor of the month, right? So you do need to maintain consistency of your strategy over time, but it also has to adjust. And so, perhaps not the exact answer you're hoping for, like, follow this formula. But it's really about having frequent check-ins with the right stakeholders, having some metrics to see if you're still on track. And then, again, socializing maybe through surveys throughout your organization that, this is still the right strategy. And then reacting appropriately when you get data that is telling you, hey, we're off course.
I think that's right. I think that there is both. So if I can plug the playbook beyond the strategy, then there's also chapters that talk about how do you measure quality and how are you tracking to what you've outlined in your strategy. So there's additional guidance out there in the playbook that everybody can go download to get. But I think you're right, Liz, that there is this, I'll use an analogy, right? A geology analogy. We have things that are carving the Grand Canyon. The Colorado River is kind of carving down. Are we still tracking to that? And then occasionally a meteorite hits, right? We acquire a business that changes things, or one of our competitors does something that significantly changes the landscape of the market, or we have some sort of event that shifts it for us as well. So you have to have that flexibility to keep your eye on the long term, but be ready to be tactical to deal with shifts to your strategy very nimbly in the near term if such an event happens.
Thanks, George. Before I go on to a next question, I want to remind everyone that I am monitoring chat. So if you do have other questions, please put them in. The question to all of you, and take your turns answering this, start with Jackie, is, do we really need a strategy? I mean, can't we just have targets or goals or something like that?
Of course, you have to ask me. Obviously, the answer is, of course, you need a strategy. That's why we're having a workshop on it. But yeah, I mean, I think it's really, to me, what the strategy does is it provides the right framework and communication to the organization to set the quality goals up for success, right? So can you just have a couple of things that you're going to do? Yes, but it's probably not setting you up for long-term continued success. And kind of, when I look at the quality strategy, it's really my story. It's the story that I want to tell around quality in my organization and how that story attaches to my business and attaches to my goals. And I think in an organization that is maturing, the lack of a quality strategy is I think in more immature companies, you may not have a quality strategy. I think as you mature, it's an absolute must, because again, it's your story. It's the story that you want to tell to your customers, to your regulators, to your employees, to your executives. It's how you build that quality thought process in everything that you do. Without a quality strategy, you're really kind of missing, to me, it's kind of the missing link to pulling it all together.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jackie. And I want to build on the framework part, because I think that's key, right? It sets the framework so everyone knows how they need to line up, what they should be working on. Without that framework, I think you can devolve into competing priorities, pet projects, that might not be aligned with where the overall business is headed. And so it's definitely necessary, and even more necessary, probably the larger an organization becomes, in my opinion, to have that guiding framework to keep everything lined up, because, smaller organizations have more opportunities for what I call higher touch. And so maybe it's easier without a strategy at that point. But at a certain tipping point, an organization that grows really needs that framework to guide actions.
Yeah, we talked a lot about this when writing this chapter. Is a strategy required? And certainly, if anybody looks at 820 or the related regulations or 1345, the short answer is no, it's not required. But and we also had conversations as to, well, does it have to be called a strategy? And I think you've even heard Jackie mention, look, you can call it whatever you'd like, or in a small company, maybe it's understood because there's some sort of just placard on the wall where everybody's like that, maybe you call it a mission or a vision or whatever it is. But really, I think underneath that, regardless of what you call it, whatever your kumbaya statements are with that, you have a why. Right. And that's not even just applicable for medical device companies or teams or organizations. It's applicable, I would say, everywhere in business and industry. What is your why? And that way, when you get to challenging decisions between business and quality and employee satisfaction, customer satisfaction, and acquisition, you have this thing that everybody has normed around and can understand and articulate in a mature organization, as Jackie says, that gives you some understanding as to this is how we decide. Or if it doesn't line up, maybe we need to shift our strategy now that we have new information. So again, very critical in medical device organizations, because I think we end up with these kind of odds between business and quality in terms of a strategy perspective. Maybe we see it a little bit more there, but I think it's applicable to have a strategy, have a why in all types of teams, organizations, and businesses.
The next question, thank you, George. Thank you, everyone. It is a free-for-all, so anyone just jump in and answer it. But the next question is around when should you have a quality strategy? And what makes me ask this is we've done a lot of work with pre-revenue companies that are mainly concerned about having a viable product. They're still testing to make sure that the technology works. They're not sure how they're going to commercialize it and scale up, but they're really focused on just making sure that they have a successful or viable idea. And the last thing on their mind is building a robust quality management system, let alone developing a quality strategy. Does any of you have a thought on terms of when companies should start to really focus on quality strategy?
Well, that's a strategy that you've actually, from my perspective, described. I mean, maybe it's a strategy that people don't want to necessarily, like the strategy of we're a small business, we're just trying to get funding, and we're all familiar with those businesses, and we've dealt with the reality of those businesses. Like to say, hey, I mean, because the obvious answer that we're always going to tell those organizations is like, start focusing on quality now. Start thinking about your quality management system, not even from a compliance perspective, but putting in place the quality management system, put it in now, because it'll save you money, it'll make you more effective longer. But we've all been in the reality of like, look, I'm just trying to keep the lights on sort of thing. Yeah. And, maybe just coming out and saying you need a quality strategy just, closes the eyes and ears to people. They don't want to hear that. But what you just described, Pat, frankly, is the description of a quality strategy from leadership in that organization, right? They're saying, we can't focus on this right now, but we are going to focus on, or we're going to just focus on these little elements, whatever the specific ones are. We're going to make sure we have the best suppliers in the interim. We're not going to worry about deploying a global EQMS just yet, right? Or we're going to focus on making sure that we at least have a pretty good DHF or whatever. And those are tactical things that lend back to a strategy. Right. But even if you don't articulate a strategy, you're still coming up with a strategy in regards to quality.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think that, I was just interfacing with a client who, by the way, completely surprised me. They are in research and development, and they reached out and said, we would like to start talking about how to implement a QMS and what needs to be done when and how that works for us. That's pretty mature, first of all. You don't typically get people who do that. I found out that the reason is because they've both been involved in large companies who had very, very stable quality management systems. So they're going into it eyes wide open, right? Like, hey, we know we need to do some stuff. But exactly what you said, their quality strategy is we're going to do as minimum as we can right now, but set ourselves up for future success. So we want to make sure that we have good supplier controls because we don't want to have to go back and worry about that later. And we're going to worry about, complaint handling in 2 years. So just helping them articulate a quality plan and strategy around how are you going to grow in the next 2 years and what does that look like so that they can have a thought process around how they're going to spend money and what that looks like and how they make themselves feel better about coming from big companies and not having their full QMS. This actually gives them comfort in saying, okay, we're doing this like specifically for a reason, not just because we don't agree that we should have one.
Liz, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, that's a great example. Really early in my career, I worked at a startup, and yes, the focus there is, do we even have a product, right? But you always have to assume you will someday have a product. And if you start laying the foundation, even a simple way as George has highlighted and Jackie has highlighted, right? You have to give it some thought, because if you don't give it thought, you're going to get a lot of surprises much later in the process of things that you should have put in place, but you didn't. Like how do you handle complaints? How do you manage suppliers, right? And then it kind of blows up and might prevent you from hitting key milestones later in the process. So I think starting early is always best. Keep it simple though, and scale it accordingly as your business grows.
Thank you all for those insights. We've reached the end of this session, and I wanted to thank George, Jackie, and Liz for their valuable insights. And we're going to be taking a break now for 1 hour and then coming back, and we will be working on the workshop.
Yeah, just before we go to a break, we just want to remind everyone, I think we need you to stay logged in. You can certainly stay off camera, go enjoy your lunch, but we're going to need to kind of plan the breakout sessions next. So please stay logged in so we can get an accurate count. And then we'll be kicking off the afternoon session with kind of an overview of what we'll accomplish in the workshop, and then we'll go to breakout sessions from there.
Great. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in approximately an hour.
So we'll be taking you into breakout groups, and you will be working to actually develop a quality strategy based on the case studies that were emailed to you. One of the case studies is on an acquired company or more of the startup version, and the other is the parent company that acquired that company. Okay, so they're similar with similar facts, but the perspective is different. We're not sure of the total group numbers yet, so don't focus on that as we're currently looking at numbers and moving folks around to balance. We're probably going to end up with 4 groups instead of 6 for this round. When you look at your cases, and hopefully everyone's got their case and had an opportunity to read it, we've provided you with the business mission and vision that's already defined, and some additional company information. Just like with any case, though, some of the facts are relevant, some of them aren't, and you may need to make some assumptions. So keep that in mind. We're going to be working in our breakout sessions from there. And at the end, we'll be reviewing and discussing overall process. I see someone's in the chat. Steve didn't receive the case study. Can someone send, Leo, perhaps, can someone send the case studies out? And if you also didn't receive a case study, if you could indicate in the chat. Thanks for indicating that. Next slide, George. Oh, well, we've got a bunch of people who did not get the case studies. Did the email not go out on the case studies?
Yeah, the emails went out, but we'll fix it on this end.
Okay, sounds good. So sit tight, everyone. Case studies are coming to your email inbox. And since it looks like so many didn't receive the case, we'll spend just a little bit of time at the beginning of your breakout just to refresh you on the facts. So sorry about that. Not sure what happened. So in the breakouts, we're going to be taking you through a structured view of designing the quality strategy. So first, in this case, we're actually going to review the mission that we've provided. We'll take a look at the data. We'll talk about what's relevant, what's not, and what facts and key decisions we might need to make. We'll then roll that into defining our strategy. All right, what's the problem we're trying to solve and why? And then as time remains, we'll catch up with some key actions to achieve the strategy, maybe at a high level. And then again, to wrap that up, what's our plan to monitor? Do we need metrics, review, et cetera? All right, so that's the process we'll follow. And as everyone can see, case studies are coming to you in the chat. So please take a look at the chat and download the case studies. George, next slide. Here's the overall schedule from 1 to 2. So we've got a little under 60 minutes now. We will be working on the case studies in a group. Okay, so you'll be magically transported to your group, all right? And some of you will have case study 1, some will have case study 2. We'll then take a quick 15-minute break, and the coordinators will regroup and kind of plan the next round. What we envision then, though, is we would then come back at 2:15 and bring the group that had case study 1 and the group that had case study 2 back into separate breakouts. And from there, we will come up with the best strategy of the 2 groups. And then we'll roll into the final review session. And then lastly, we'll wrap up the workshop, talk about insights, questions, etc. All right. So that's the plan. I'm going to pause and see if there's questions before we roll into the breakouts. All right. If you want to, yes.
This is Joe, real quick on this end. They're just finalizing the group alignments now. So give us some minute.
We still need some more time. Okay. Sounds good.
They're going out right now.
Okay, great. All right. Have a good breakout.
Okay. So let's see. I think we're about a minute in.
Yeah.
And yeah. Liz, do you want to cue this up or?
I can cue it up. I was actually queuing it up to a muted mic, but let me try again. So thank you, everyone. We're at kind of the final round, and we're ready to share the 2 final strategies from the case study number 1 and case study number 2. So why don't we start with case study number 1, and Robin is going to share her screen, and we'll share that with everyone, and then George will pivot to your case study at that point. Okay, great. So you can see it up on the screen. Robin, do you want to read it, or do you want me to read it?
Fine, reading it. So we had a lot of discussion in our groups between both groups, which was great. And we came in and very similar, but we had a lot to add to it. But our overall strategy would be to develop quality processes, infrastructure, and people to achieve product approval for the FDA and prepare for broader commercialization globally while leveraging BigCo expertise, systems resources, and developing a long-term quality integration strategy. So we really came at this about a little bit short-term and long-term. Short-term, we wanted to really focus on getting that FDA approval, but long-term, we needed to make sure we had a plan of what we're going to do for integration, as well as what we're going to do globally from a product, since they wanted to go to CE mark. And so those were kind of the key things that we thought about putting into the strategy.
And it was interesting because the strategy between the two groups was very similar, but I think as we merged together, Robin's team had, included the focus on infrastructure and people, in addition to, framing out the quality processes as well. And so we decided to merge them. And then in the next round, we went and merged the actions between the two groups. And so now you can see the consolidated list of actions between our two groups. So, Robin, you want to hit those too, or do you want me to hit those?
Sure, I'm fine. So first we talked about, really doing the baseline assessment of TMC needs, that QMS needs, creating between quality management planning, making sure we have a matrix of those actions, and then developing a product of quality plan specifically for the product to ensure we had compliant product, and then ensure we have this tier 1 supplier assessment, because there was a lot in the case about the suppliers. We felt we need to conduct resource planning and capability assessment. Some things to consider there are the resources from TMC are only there for 6 months. We need to assess that as part of that. Identifying TMC appropriate CMO, and then developing the management oversight between TMC and BigCo. Then we wanted to assess the QMS system itself and define the integration plan and approach, whether that's independent or harmonized, and that could be short-term and long-term. Short-term, maybe it's independent, long-term, maybe it's harmonized. And then define and identify the interim processes that are needed to support the PMA inspection. So again, thinking of that short-term goal. We want to review the mission of TMC and BigCo and ensure we have alignment there between our company's missions. We also want to have a baseline assessment of BigCo and TMC with gaps around PMAs. Does either company really know how to submit a PMA and get approval? And then we thought it was important to achieve the product approval at 12 months, because that's, the focus of TMC. And then we had discussion on developing yield and cost targets as part of the goals, because can we even make the product at the end of the day that we're trying to get approved? You want to add anything there, Liz?
Yeah, so again, good merging between the two groups of the actions. And I think between the both groups, we pretty much had covered all the bases here, but I would love to hear what the thoughts are of the other group and what questions they might have based on our strategy. George, Jackie, team, question?
Just to be clear, so you're coming at this, it's the same companies, but you're coming at this from what perspective?
From TinyCo's perspective, right?
Okay.
It's BigCo's helping TinyCo develop the strategy.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess my question would be, what did you see differently because you were TinyCo, or that this is the strategy specifically for TinyCo, right?
Correct.
So how did you think about that differently than if you were BigCo?
I think technically in the case study, we were a big quality manager assigned with developing TinyCo's strategy.
Right.
So you actually have the Big Co experience, and you need to use that to help TinyCo.
Right. So we had a lot of discussion of, okay, we have to help this small company get to their goal, but how much do we want to integrate with Big Co? And again, that's why we left the strategy about leveraging the Big Co expertise versus having specifics at this point until we do the gap assessments to understand where we even are.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Did that answer your questions, Jackie?
I think so. I think so. I think, what's interesting is and I think, when I share what our two groups came up with, we didn't necessarily come up with something super far off, but I think some of the assumptions and the conversation behind it were decidedly different.
Right.
Yeah. Because we were Big Co designing our own quality strategy.
Yeah.
Hoping not to,
to incorporate TinyCo as part of that overall strategy, right?
Yeah.
Or no? Okay.
George is going to love talking about it.
Well, I was going to say, like, we'll give TinyCo their strategy when we are ready.
Right.
No, I'm kidding. I'm making that as a joke, but we've seen. I'm sure we've all seen
that.
We've seen those sorts of things. I mean, that's the point of the joke.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Thank you for laughing. Right.
Yeah,
I'll give you my opinion when I'm ready for it. Right. Yeah. Your opinion when I'm ready for it too. Right.
Any other feedback on the strategy before we take a look at the case study 2 strategy? Questions, feedback?
I think just it's really interesting. I think you're going to see when we get to it that it's really interesting to me. Even though Jackie warned us all as like a working group behind this, how everybody wants to go right to the objectives, right? Uh-huh. And she's like, you got to kind of keep pulling this back to get to the strategy piece of it, and that sounds so fundamentally easy. And I think what I've concluded is like, you can't do it without, you have to kind of do both. It's kind of this back and forth thing. It's a chicken and egg thing where you're like, all right, look, we want to bring the product to market, but why do we want to do that? And we have to be considerate specifically of their post-market quality system capabilities. Well, why do we want to do that? And there's this back and forth. There's not really a right and wrong. There's this conversation from a strategy perspective to make those business/quality decisions. I think that your group maybe we didn't develop them perhaps as in a detailed fashion as you did. I think it's great. But there's this kind of this back and forth there that is really interesting to me in seeing how these things are developed as a part of this exercise.
Yeah, definitely.
And as Big Co, you decided for Tiny Medical that you were going to leverage Big Co's expertise.
We didn't say what, right? We talked about just where we could, right? We wanted to leverage that, but we had to do kind of the gap assessments to understand where. And we had a lot of discussion of, okay, do you want to keep it alone for the 9 months to get approval and then leverage, right? So it's not necessarily even short term you're going to leverage, right? But you got to, they have more expertise.
Yeah. And then Robin, based on the case, Based on the case study, there appeared to be lots of gaps, lots of work TinyCo needed. And let's not reinvent a wheel if Big Co has a solution that's working. So I think that's what we want.
That's really interesting to me, though, because I mean, that mentality is often not what I see from the acquired company, right? Like,
yeah,
it's more that you have the deep pocketbook. You know?
Yeah, I think we had a good discussion in the first group about there were some aspects that we did need to preserve, right? Particularly around the design and the knowledge, since it was a hand assembly that we had already submitted on, right? But we probably were lacking in areas like a quality management system, registration and so forth. So how do we kind of pick and choose what's needed, but not lose, the innovation part or the things related to the product That's really key to getting to market. And because there were only 9 months, and the good point was raised that we'd already submitted since we were waiting for an inspection. We really couldn't change the manufacturing process even if we wanted to at that point.
Okay, cool. Anything else from the team on the big co?
Tiny co.
Well, I'm asking if the big co folks have any questions for the tiny co folks.
The tiny co. I think tiny co is ready to hear from big co now, George.
Yeah, I'm looking forward.
Well, since we delegate everything in big co, right? I'm going to delegate this to Jackie to present her screen, and then
all right,
we're going to have Sherry speak to it.
Well, Sherry and team.
Right.
Very good. We do, one of our values is we do better work together.
Absolutely. So I've been just really fascinated listening to this. And so I just want to put in my thought really quickly before I dive into what the team had come up with, that I think based on the bullet points that we were given, it's a very logical and appropriate assumption that Tiny Co doesn't have much in the way of a quality system already existing. I mean, they're working from draft procedures and they have like 5 people. And but I would just caution again, just from my own very acknowledged personal experience, what I'm living in right now, that you shouldn't necessarily in the real world make any assumptions about anything, right? Mm-hmm. And one of those assumptions that would be dangerous would be that an acquired startup doesn't have a robust quality system, on its own that would merit careful consideration before, go away, you're going to do it our way kind of big company acquiring oversight. And I say that with a very personal bias, because for the past couple of years, I've been working diligently with my tiny little team and my little tiny co to establish what I think of as a robust quality system. So my little personal plug there.
Good insight. Thanks for sharing, Sherry.
Yeah, and I think it's just, in general, it's true for anything that assumptions, what do they say, right?
Yeah, they're dangerous.
So, but I think given the data, clearly that's not an assumption, it's a conclusion that we drew, based on the data in this exercise, and it's quite appropriate. So, one other thing I thought that there was a lot of alignment. I saw more detail in what was just presented than I think our 2 teams had, or maybe the one team that I was working with. We were a lot more focused on just working through strategy at kind of a 40,000 foot level. I really liked all of the detail that I saw in the other presentations. So I thought that was really helpful, and I'm hoping to grab it at the end of this session on the upload available to us, because I think I'm going to be able to take some thoughts away in the real world again. But anyway, so what am I looking at? There we are. Okay, so am I supposed to be kind of just? I'll share the strategy that our team had come up with. Jackie, is that the idea?
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is the amalgamation kind of our 2 groups. It's in Sherry's group's format, but informed a lot by George's group's thought process. And I just cut and pasted and kept theirs at the bottom there because I thought that was a lot of good detail. But yeah.
Yep. Okay, so I'll kick it off and then I'll turn it over to the other members of the team. So I think the strategy that's here at the top is what we've come up with to establish and implement an effective and efficient QMS that ensures timely FDA approval and scalable manufacturing capability of the product AF, and enables future integration and continuous improvement of the QMS. So again, I feel like that is really aligned with what had just been shared regarding the short-term focus of getting that product out the door, along with the broader, goals of the QMS, and I think we didn't go into the details of what a QMS is, right? The people, the processes, the infrastructure. I think that was good to spell out. But that I think we had just assumed was built into the definition of QMS. So, but it's never a bad idea to be explicit. So, yeah. And so the objectives and goals that we had come up with, and I think maybe that on the bottom, maybe that's like a number 6, the manufacturing scaling. So I think I'll treat it as such. So one is, again, just like the previous group had mentioned, the first out of the gate would be that assessment, the gap assessment, identifying gaps and risks based on where tiny companies QMS is. And then determining then from that, the risk mitigation and action plan, and leveraging as appropriate the expertise from the big company. For example, in post-market compliance, final work instructions, supply chain, et cetera. Looking at quality staffing needs, kind of in the short term, and then longer down the road, longer term, to, again, support the immediate approval, and then the longer term integration activities. Establish that framework for the integration decision making to align with, again, those longer term business needs, and then determine and implement integration and improvement objectives. And we left that to be determined. Yeah, and then the whole question, that 6th aspect there, it's huge. It's not last but not least. It's definitely huge of scaling everything, right? Manufacturing, and all of that expertise, the framework as well.
Jackie, I have a similar question for you that you had for us on just the perception of how you came at this. Because like when I think of Big Co, not even reading the case of Big Co, right? Is this Big Co's strategy specifically for Tiny Co or Big Co's overall strategy?
No, this is Big Co's overall strategy. Now that we have Tiny Co. And so really what you're seeing is Big Co's quality strategy for the foreseeable future is how to figure out how to work with Tiny Co and get the product to the market. I think one of the things that really informed some of this strategy was around, and why it looks so Tiny Co centric, is because that's where Big Co is going to grow. That's the business strategy. And so we really wanted to make sure that when we took this back to the business team, they understood that quality understood that this is our number 1 priority right now, is to get this product out the door and to make it successful. Integration is expensive, and there's all kinds of financial targets around the success of integration. So it's going to be the elephant in the room if we don't specifically address it as the Big Co head of quality, right? The other piece was around how we need to communicate that we want to embrace Tiny Co and we don't want to overtake them. Because there are some factors in the case that were concerning, like people can leave after 6 months, right? And so
can I ask a question? Because I was struggling with the same thing. I think Robin's question was at, this is so Tiny Co centric for a Big Co strategy. It feels like it leaves all the other $1.2 billion of business they had before acquiring Tiny Co kind of in the dust. So does the strategy need to acknowledge, continue supporting the businesses we have while we develop?
So I'll answer that, because I think, and one of the things that struck me immediately about Tiny Co's perspective is that in listening to everybody talk, there was a fence that was put up. We're Tiny Co. We're going to exist. We need to, and that. And whether or not you intended it that way, that was exactly kind of there was a pride in Tiny Co. Sitting on the Big Co side, I can tell you instantly that a lot of that opening conversation was like, okay, so we're taking Tiny Co. And there was a and one of the things I kept coming back was, look at these values, like your values, the very top values on the thing is like, we do great things working together, and our employees are our greatest asset. You say that, then you give a 6-month contract to these people.
Right.
I mean, that to me is like something's fundamentally conflicting there. But then let's take all that back. So yes, you've got an established business that's a 1.2 billion global, all that. You also have this other new business that may have more intensity, may challenge your own systems harder than they've been challenged before. And so, and there was a statement that this may be the first acquisition. So maybe some of the language needs to not just be TinyCo centric, but leave open the idea that this may be the first in a chain.
Yeah.
But yes, go ahead.
I think your point is well taken. We talked about that.
I think.
Oh, George went off for just a second.
We lost him.
He'll be back. I think your point is well taken. We had multiple conversations around, should we specifically talk about the product or not? We went back and forth in our group. But ultimately, we decided that
Got a robot in.
Oh no. Ultimately, I think we decided that acknowledging that the next year's focus of strategy was definitely going to be related to that product, period. Regardless of, but I think that's a good point. Could we have added something to the strategy about keep everything else going in the background? Yeah, we could have. Not in an hour, we couldn't.
I thought it was interesting what Daniel was saying just about how us and TinyCo put up. George is trying to.
This is difficulty here with the internet, I guess, but some of this is just, Julie, to your question. I think we're all right. Like you can't define a strategy agnostic of your existing products.
Right.
Right. You have to consider the strategy broadly. And it might be that you're saying, hey, with the acquisition of this company, we're going to, discontinue. I mean, you've all dealt with this, right? With your manufacturing plans, right? Hey, we're going to move this capability to this particular plant. We're going to deprecate this in this other plant. That's all part of the strategy conversation. For the purpose of this exercise, I probably, at least in my group, I pushed a bit of an ignorance to that since we were geared specifically towards defining an integration plan for Tiny Medical.
We totally did too. Yeah,
that's just one chapter of the. I think that's just the way the case study's written. But you can't really do a strategy for just one product. So your point's spot on. You have to be considerate of everything that's in your portfolio.
Yeah. I think it's a little bit of the nuance in the case study like we had in ours. We were developing a strategy for TinyCo, but we, as our task, we were a Big Co employee defining a TinyCo strategy. So it's that nuance in the ask, like, it just puts a little bit of a different perspective on what you're trying to achieve. And so.
Yeah, and I found it was interesting what Daniel was saying about his perception of how it came across that we're TinyCo and we're not, because that's not what we discussed. We said we're TinyCo, we probably have to, but we want to do what's best for getting the product to the market, not whether it was TinyCo or Big Co. So it's interesting just even when you talk about the other question of communicating your strategy, right? And how you communicate it and how it comes across.
Okay. Anything
why
else?
so angry, TinyCo? Why so angry?
We're not angry. We're a very happy group. I don't know what happened.
Anything else for case study 2 from anyone? Questions, other insights? Now that we've seen both, it's interesting to compare and contrast the approaches.
It's interesting to see how similar they really are at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other thing I took away is this cannot be done in your head of quality's office, right? You don't just go in as a head of quality and sit at your desk and then incubate a little about what my quality strategy is.
Yeah.
That's not going to work. It really is an effort of conversation and sharing and perspective. And it shouldn't all just be quality people either, right? The quality strategy isn't owned. It might be driven by the head of QA, but it has to be owned by the entire company. It has to move along with everything else. And so I think that's important as well.
I think the guiding questions that Liz put into at least the Big Co case study. I'm less familiar with the Tiny Co in preparation for this, but the consideration of the internal and the external stakeholders, right? So the definition of this strategy really, and you're seeing it in both of our strategies: assess, evaluate. You're trying to figure out what the capabilities are. You're trying to be considerate of the people, of course. There is this involvement of all of those stakeholders. And so to your point, Jackie, you don't just sit there and do this by yourself in 40 minutes, right? There's this archaeology that needs to be done on both sides to truly be considerate of what the capabilities are and how quickly you're willing to deal with organizational change.
100,000% support and agree. I feel like if I had an emoji that I could have put up there, like 100 and a smiley face, I would totally agree. And from my experience, yeah, there you go. From my experience, even if you've got everybody at the kind of management level, grassroots, everybody's sleeves rolled up, ready to roll. We all support it. Makes sense to us. If you've got the executives in either or both or any of the stakeholder organizations who are behind the scenes going like, yeah, sure, whatever, but stay focused on our own interests and make sure to protect our company's interests at all costs, and I'm going to hold you accountable for that. Oh boy, it all kind of falls apart, right? So I think, and this is again another trite saying that we all know as quality professionals of top management, support is key. Cannot be understated how important that is. That you have to have top management, directly communicated, and also behind the scenes, full support for any of these initiatives or activities, or it's going to be, again, really hard for the folks who are, doing their darndest on the ground to implement this.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sherry. Thank you, because that'll be key to the success of the strategy, right? And then, ensuring that you've got all those stakeholders part of the process right from the beginning also. So really good insight.
Can you tell I've been around the block a couple times?
Yeah, a little bit.
And it's all for the good. It's all good. I've learned a lot. So.
Absolutely. Any other insights directly on the case? And then if not, we'll just shift to kind of more of the wrap up about the process, insights you've had along the way. Would you do anything differently now that we've gone through this experience? So I'm just going to leave those questions out there for the group, and please chime in. This is the interactive portion of the wrap up.
One comment I would make is that the case study was set up with the acquisition already being made, and so I think it's really important to acknowledge the due diligence assessments that have to occur before acquisition. And if your company has a robust due diligence process, so that when you acquire smaller companies, you're not acquiring, warning letters and 483s and everything else that might, be in the closet.
Good point about due diligence, right? Yeah, excellent point. Thank you, Julie.
I'd say my experience on that is there might be warning letters or 483s or whatever, and your business people don't necessarily care.
Yeah. Yes.
Right? You just need to know that they're there so that you understand how you're going to try and help mitigate it.
Right.
Exactly. Jillian, I think you've got your hand up.
Yes, I think it's more of a question. When the exercise was set up and we were kind of looking at this from two different lenses, was the expectation is that we would have two different statements and then we ended up with the same kind of similar statement, like with the two different lenses? I'm just kind of curious if there was like a rubric for what we were expecting out of this, because I find it interesting that it was so similar.
I don't think we had, there is no right answer, first of all, right? It was more about the experience and the process of working through it. And we didn't have a set, hey, we need to direct them to get to, X, right, on the map, right? It was really more about the process of doing it. And then, the insights that you would all learn along the way so that hopefully you could take back some of this when you are faced with trying to develop your own quality strategy. But no, Jillian and Jackie or George or Robin or others who were on the working team, what are your thoughts? I don't remember. We didn't really have an end. Hey, it's got to look like this when we were planning this.
Well, just to back up a little bit. So, the genesis of this was the creation of the playbook. The playbook was written just over a year ago, and I think we completed it, and the folks that you saw on the initial slides this morning, their names, there was a bunch of people that contributed to it. Yes, it's really hard to write a book when you have 10 different authors all operating remotely and like giving everybody different chapters, and then somebody has to kind of pull that all back together. The next thought that came from that was, let's go ahead and see if we can get organizations to pilot these concepts in the playbook. Not surprisingly, at least not surprisingly to me, nobody really signed up to be like, I am going to pilot chapter 3, right? And I think that's because, that kind of there's probably a variety of reasons for that, but it's a bit challenging for organizations to say, hey, we want to come and pilot the quality strategy chapter because we're not doing that really well. That kind of puts you in a position of vulnerability. So then the thought here was, what are the things that we can do to illustrate the concepts in the playbook? This workshop is one of those, and Jackie, Liz, Robin, a couple of others here as well, we took this on. We said, hey, let's try this out where there's this use case of an organization needing to put together a quality strategy. And then from that, Jackie had those slides and Liz had the use cases, and we modified those things. But I don't think it was like, and we're expecting them all to come to the same answer. In as so much as Liz had said, it was, can we really illustrate the concepts that are in the playbook and considering of a quality strategy? So, I think it'd be interesting to see, so there's a little bit of a bias here, right? Most of you, I think, are quality professionals or regulatory professionals. So we're probably all likely to kind of steer to the same sorts of answers. If we ran this experiment with this, like with engineers or business leaders or people in marketing and said, come up with a quality strategy, would they come up with the same answers from tiny co to big co? I don't know. We're not going to test it out 14 times to do that, but I'm not particularly surprised that people of the same sort of ilk came up with a similar sort of consideration. I would think we might get very different answers with different groups. Great question, Jillian.
Yeah, and Jillian, great question. George, great response. I think the other thing too is that what you heard, I think, was the comment about how to, and I think Jackie, you mentioned this about how the business side basically says, let the quality and regulatory folks will figure that out. We're gonna market the product. We're going to commercialize the product. The warning letters, the challenges, that'll all get figured out. And I think that's where the difference between what we would hear from marketing and sales or another function within the organization around, well, I'm looking for quality to help me with this, or I'm looking for quality to tell me what we're going to do, that kind of thing. So it's great that this group was able to get to the conclusions that you did. But I also think, to George's point about the implementation of the playbook, that's exactly why the playbook was developed, was so that professionals can share ideas and can share best practices and successful practices. And, very early on, we talked about, are we on a best practice journey, or are we on a successful practice journey? Because who decides what's best? And so this is the opportunity to really talk about what could success look like. And if you all walk away from today's session with a couple of things that, hey, I remember talking about that at the workshop, and you know what, don't quite understand that, but I'm going to give Liz a call and ask her because I remember her talking about that, and maybe she can help me guide us through an actual real world event, right? Because a lot of the value in what we do is being able to demonstrate those successful practices or give examples where it's been applied and it's worked so that others can learn. So I think that's going into the planning. I think that's what the planning part of this was. And you guys, if you were to ask me, and I'm going to tell you anyway, you guys nailed it. So great job.
So, Joe, I got a slightly different point to mention here. I think M&A it's not a big company, small company strategy, but the divestiture is going to be a different aspect. There, they will have a big company strategy and a small company strategy. But for an M&A, it would be aligned, I think, a lot more.
Yeah, I have to chuckle a little bit at how we all came to the conclusion about like, well, we need to better understand the due diligence, right? Because, I mean, we all have this expectation of due diligence or M&A type stuff where it's going to give us a lot of operational information, and typically the financial people are just wanting to look at the books, right? And we don't get the opportunity to drill into that operational understanding. Yeah, it goes back to the principle of assessment and understanding what you're getting into with an organization.
Yeah, I think if we were to do a due diligence exercise or workshop, the first question I would ask is how many of you had participated in due diligences that resulted in a no-go decision based on a quality regulatory issue versus taking on these challenges and figuring them out, which then plays right into your quality plan and your quality strategy.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I mean, to the being part of the M&A team at a company and leading some of that effort, it was sometimes even a question whether we needed to dig very far at all in quality and regulatory, other than do a cursory review. Have they had a consent decree or a warning letter? Is there an active recall? No? Okay, good. Let's just go. Because no matter what else you find, we're going to figure out how we're going to fix it. So don't worry about that, and let's not waste resources doing that. I'm not saying that's the right way to do it. As a quality leader, that was horrifying for me. Like, you're just going to hand me this pile of whatever. But I did understand the perspective of my business leaders in the way that they approached it that way.
I think my experience, when I was coming from, working for Medtronic that does a lot of acquisitions, is that we do accept that risk, but then our lessons learned are always don't accept that much risk the next time. So we're constantly refining that acquisition process to be better. The question is, do we actually listen to our lessons learned?
Great insights. Other thoughts on the process itself? Was this easy?
It definitely wasn't easy with the information given, right? There was definitely a lot of assumptions you had to make, and depending on those assumptions could really change what your strategy looked like at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Other thoughts here? Hillary, go for it.
I thought it was interesting, just our different approaches and different starting points. And, how we all have one thing that kind of sticks in our mind from our experience, or like our ghost from our past. And we focus, it's human nature to focus on that issue. So I found it interesting to listen to the different starting points.
I would suggest that, well, this is driven as a quality strategy, and we're looking at it at the business organizational level, that there are principles in here that are applicable. And maybe this is just so basic, it's understood, but it's applicable not just for the big organization, but it might be applicable for a division or a team or a sub team, right? And it doesn't even have to be in devices. You're thinking, for me, the epiphany that I've gotten out of this and looking at the materials that Liz and Jackie generated and tying it back to the playbook is you're asking the why, right? As a consultant, I often say, like, it really comes down, like, this is the secret of consulting, right? It's really just 3 questions, right? It's who are you? What do you want to be? And what are you doing to get there, right? And then there's a 4th question, why? Why is that important to you? And that can be applicable for your quality team or your regulatory team or your development team or your facility, your manufacturing plant or your software group or whatever it is, or a whole division. Obviously, it changes, the nature of the game changes a bit when you look at that at those different levels of scale. But so my suggestion to this is that you can probably take the things that are in the playbook there from a quality strategy and some of these tools that you have in those case studies, and you can leverage those in other settings as well, as opposed to, I'm only going to think about this quality strategy thing when I'm acquiring some company in Sunnyvale. We should have put in our strategy that we're all going to move there too, but that from Big Co, but headquarters going there. But I digress.
Oh, everyone's remote now. No one moves anymore.
This is true, right?
George, I think that's a good comment. Medtronic's going through a large scale reorganization, and it almost feels like some of these things apply in just assessing differences between sites and the org structure as it's trying to realign.
Good point. Thank you everyone for your very active engagement, particularly all of you stuck around to the very end. We do appreciate it. I think it was a really engaging workshop. We hope you liked the format, particularly as we have other chapters that we may consider doing something similar on. So, Joe, I'm not sure, is there like survey feedback or things like that MDIC sends out so we can gather some feedback?
Yeah, Leo, I think Leo is still on. I think, Leo, you can answer that question better than I can. I think there has been in the past, especially for something like this, Liz. I think it's appropriate. If we haven't done one before, we should send something out.
Yeah, we can absolutely do that. I think that'd be great for this group.
Okay, great. It would really help.
Also, the Word documents, Liz, that were created, will they be shared? The strategy document?
Yeah, if we can resurface my crashed file, yeah, absolutely.
So mine, that makes sense.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, I want to just echo what Liz has said. Thanks for hanging in there. It's been a long afternoon. For those of you that started early this morning and they listened in on the pre-recorded sessions, I thought we had a really good turnout there as well. I want to do a special thank you to Leo and Desiree, Savannah, and our production group, Greg Gibson, who helped do the real picture recordings, your flexibility for all of the work that you guys have done. Big shout out to all of the speakers and the planning, the content. For those of you that participated in today's event, your facilitators spent a lot of time getting this right, and it really showed today. So I really do appreciate all the hard work that you guys have put into this forum today. The only thing I miss is not being face-to-face, which would have been really good for a nice little post-forum celebration. But I think today's forum really has exceeded expectations on our end. Cisco, I think you're still on. I don't know if you wanted to say anything to the group before we formally close.
No, I think just to echo a lot of what you've already said, right? I really want to thank everyone for the engagement, for the participation. I've been listening into the discussions going on back and forth for, in the space here for the quality strategy. And it always is fascinating to me because it's the same kind of struggles even we feel internally when we're thinking about our stuff, when we're trying to plan our quality strategies. So it's, I guess, a little bit supportive to know that we're not the only ones going through it, or that it's not a new thing here. But it's also encouraging to know that, there's a path forward, and that does sometimes take that discussion, and that hard work needs to be done in order to really get to something that is meaningful and can move things along. But I don't think we'd get there. And as often happens with all these forums, we, FDA, learn a lot from the discussions and the engagement. So I truly do appreciate that and the work that went into this, especially since it is remote, and that's always a lot more difficult to manage and really execute. So, thank you. I think from our taking our perspective on this, it's been a wonderful engagement and forum, and hopefully soon we'll be able to do this again in a face-to-face version.
All right, everyone, again, thank you very much for all your hard work.
Okay,
Appreciate it.
thanks.
Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.